This is Israel's 9/11. This is Israel's 9/11, and Israel will do everything to bring our sons and daughters back home.
Well, now we have an IDF document that has been revealed that was distributed 2 weeks before October 7th that had granular details of the way that October 7th would unfold.
The National Security Archive has gotten a hold of 120 documents from the CIA now, and they are now public. So what do we find out from it? Well, we find out that it turns out the CIA gave 7 different warnings to the Bush administration. Bin Laden is coming. Al-Qaeda is coming. Be careful. This is a serious threat. It's imminent. Let me tell you all about it. And in fact, Bush administration wanted no part of it. He was on leave, as the head of the CIA described it, for the entire month of August, which actually tied a record. Things like, quote, Bin Laden and associates making near-term threats. And then a person whose name is redacted says, expects Osama bin Laden to launch multiple attacks over the coming days. How much clearer could they be? He's coming. We've got it. We have the information. Please get ready.
There's a reason why al-Nusra and ISIS never attacked Israel, because they're sponsored by Israel and the CIA.
As I've said before, this aspect of our strategy was moving too slowly, but the fall of Ramadi has galvanized the Iraqi government. So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province.
In 2014, the Site Intelligence Group, an Israeli intelligence outfit, released an ISIS beheading video before the group itself had released the video. This is the way it went. She's on CNN. She's explaining that within a short time after our release, ISIS account on social media indicated that within a short time they would be releasing the video, only we actually had the video beforehand and were able to beat them with the release. This is her. It's a one-man operation. She's an Israeli woman named Rita Katz. She's based in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C., and she releases the videos to her subscribers before the bad guys in Iraq have released the video at all. Well, how does she have a copy of the video beforehand? If nothing else, this shows that there's a very close relationship between Israeli intelligence and ISIS. And ISIS is, in fact, the acronym for Israeli Secret Intelligence Services. That's their English acronym. Now, SITE is, as I said, it stands for Search for International Terrorist Entities, provides intelligence about terrorist groups to a wide range of paying clients, including military and intelligence agencies from the United States. And when they killed this guy in Syria the other day, the Israelis had said about him. He had made these predictions, or he had made these threats to Europe. Adnani had said, "We will strike you in your homeland," calling on Muslims to kill Europeans, especially the spiteful and filthy French. "Smash his head with a rock, or slaughter him with a knife, or run him over with your car," he said, according to SITE Intelligence Group. So I'm showing you that this, and here they made this, they produced this video, they distributed this video, which is clearly fraudulent. This is not Osama bin Laden. This is one of his body doubles. This is one of the fakes. Again, they released this before it had even been released by the Al-Qaeda people. Again, another one. And when there was the shooting in Orlando, at the nightclub in Orlando, a couple days later, the Israeli prime minister went and made a video to explain what had happened in Florida, as if he knew. But if you listen to what he says, you'll understand how he draws us closer together, Israel and the West, and ties us at the hips. He says, this week's shooting wasn't merely an attack on the LGBT community. It was an attack on all of us, on our common values of freedom and diversity and choice. Radical Islamist terror makes no distinction between shades of infidel. This week it was gays in Orlando. A few days before it was Jews in Tel Aviv. All of us are targets. Working together, we will defeat them even faster. And this is how this is the money that America has spent in fighting this war on terror since 2001. $1.7 trillion. All borrowed money. So the 9/11 cover-up is essentially part of the deception that has enabled the culprits to deceive the American public into supporting the global war on terror, which was, after all, the goal of the 9/11 terror atrocity. As President Nixon said, it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up.
The goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war. Very soon, within the next few years, it will become the normal for there to be a constant war in the West. People will reach maturity and adulthood under the understanding that there is always a war. And at that point, war will not be something that is unusual or surprising or horrifying. War will become the new normal.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 7. This is the final episode in this whole long series regarding 9/11 and getting to understand the ideology behind Zionism and why that went global with operations, as far as everything always culminating going back to Israel and Palestine and that section of the world, which we know is Palestine.
Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
And you know, that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
Why is 85% of Trump's cabinet Jewish Israeli dual citizens? Why is 80% of Joe Biden's cabinet Jewish Israeli citizens? They don't give a fuck about America. They're opening our borders. Why do they get a fucking ethno state while America gets flooded with millions of migrants?
This is going to cover the end game. So what's been the end game of all this? So let's talk about October 7th. Let's just start there. Let's start with modern day things happening at the moment. Now, with October 7th, it's being revealed, a lot of information is being debunked, and they were very much aware, just like 9/11, that October 7th was going to happen. So just watch this.
I'm going to play you the report that aired in Israeli media. It was originally in Hebrew. We have a dubbed English version. Now, we haven't been able to specifically verify this translation. However, we did check the key details, and they match up with other reporting, which is why we feel comfortable showing it to you, but just wanted to give you that disclaimer that we have not been able to officially verify this dubbed English translation. Nevertheless, let's take a listen to this report.
Almost 9 months to the return in October, while the IDF still hasn't published the investigations of the default, we are tonight revealing the intelligence document of 800-2 that was distributed only 2 weeks before that Sabbath, and gave the Southern Command an accurate picture of the raid plan on the OTEF, including the exact number of abductees that was rehearsed in advance by the terrorists.
The document that came to us was compiled in the Gaza Committee and was given the title Detailed End-to-End Raid Training. It was distributed on September 19, 2023, less than 3 weeks before the Hamas plan went into effect. The person who wrote it reveals in great detail a series of instructions from the elite unit of Hamas, the Nakba, to attack military outposts, kibbutzim. This document starts by discussing Hamas's military arms company training sequences. Sweating Division's intelligence staff meticulously trailed every tiny detail. At 11 in the morning, several companies were observed gathering for the beginning of the faith, not before prayer and lunch. At 12, equipment and weapons are distributed to the fighters, and then an exercise of when the company is ready. At 2 o'clock, the raid practices begin. The authors of the document detail a series of exercises carried out by Hamas forces before the attack. The military arm of the organization practiced ground and air raids on Israeli territory, in front of the eyes of the members of the Southern Command. The first step in the exercise, according to the document, is to open loopholes in the Day Metzali situation, built in a strip that simulates the outposts in the Gaza envelope. After breaching the fence, they attack. The exercise was carried out by 4 companies, and each company was assigned a different station. The Israeli intelligence officers who followed the exercise formulated in the document the next steps after the break into Israeli territory and the takeover of the outposts. The handing over of the soldiers and prisoners to the company commanders. The expected number of hostages was written between 200 and 250 people. The military targets of the raid that were also practiced were described in the document. The headquarters of the bases, control and control headquarters. The synagogues at the bases, the squadron headquarters, the communications headquarters, Roayor systems, and the residences of the soldiers and female soldiers. And if what you have seen so far is not creepy enough, now it turns out that the intelligence of the Southern Command and the Gaza Strip was not only aware of the Hamas kidnapping plan, but in that document there is an exact breakdown of the conditions of the hostages' detention, including instructions for the kidnappers, and what to do in an extreme case, how to hold them, and under what conditions the kidnappers can be executed.
So you can hear from that report the level of detailed knowledge that they had just 2 weeks before October 7th. We can put this Jerusalem Post report up on the screen that again verifies a lot of the key details in that report, that dubbed English report we just brought you. They say, for example, the report detailed that Israeli intelligence officials monitored the Hamas exercises, documented the steps Hamas planned to take after breaching Israeli territory and taking over military posts. The expected number of hostages, according to the document, was between 200 and 250 people. Quote, Israeli intelligence officials who monitored the exercise detailed the next steps after breaching into Israel, taking over the post, determining that the instruction is to hand over the captured soldiers to the company commanders. The expected number of hostages, it states, is between 200 and 250 people.
56 of them were military and police. So 370. Why do you think the number came down from 1,400 to 1,129?
Because it was inaccurate?
No.
Why?
According to Israeli official, because so many bodies were so burned and so stuck together, they could not distinguish the Hamas fighters from the Israeli hostages, right? So that much fire that burns the body that much, do you think people with machine guns on motorcycle have that kind of fire? No, that was the firepower of tanks and Apache, and according to Israeli witnesses, Israel was a lot, according to a Hannibal directive, if people would like to actually look that up, Israel actually killed many of those hostages on the way out. As a matter of fact, one of the soldiers said, I saw a car running back to the borders, and I know that there were hostages, so I thought of killing everybody instead of taking them hostage. And that is so effective.
An investigation by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz has revealed that the Israeli army ordered the Hannibal Directive on October 7th last year. This controversial military policy aims to prevent the capture of Israeli soldiers by enemy forces at any cost. Based on testimonies from Israeli soldiers and senior army officers, the report indicates that during Hamas's attack last October, the Israeli army made decisions with limited and unverified information. The order stated that not a single vehicle can return to Gaza, implying significant consequences for those kidnapped along the Gaza border. On October 7th, Hamas captured dozens of Israelis, many of whom are still in captivity or have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza. Many of those captured were civilians, not soldiers, to whom the Hannibal Directive does not apply. The death toll from the Hamas-led attacks in Israel is estimated to be 1,139, with nearly 250 others taken captive. In Gaza, more than 38,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks since October 7th. Haaretz reported that the Hannibal Directive was employed at 3 army facilities infiltrated by Hamas. Despite this, 7 soldiers were kidnapped and 15 spotters, as well as 38 other soldiers, were killed. The Hannibal Directive allows the use of maximum force to prevent abduction, even at the risk of killing a captive soldier. It was last invoked in 2014 during the war on Gaza. The directive is believed to have been revoked in 2016 due to criticism and its various interpretations within the army. A senior Israeli army source confirmed the use of the Hannibal procedure on October 7th. An Israeli army spokesperson said internal investigations are underway to learn from the events and that the results will be presented to the public with transparency.
You talk about the hostages. Israel has a Hannibal Directive in which it has orders in place to kill at least its own soldiers, lest they fall into the hands of Palestinian groups. And there's substantial reporting that in fact, was utilized on October 7th, not just against Israeli soldiers, but against civilians. Are we not now in a situation where Israel may be using the Hannibal Directive, not just on Israelis, civilians and military, but on U.S. citizens and other foreign nationals?
So I am not familiar in any way with either that supposed directive or those reports. And so
you've never heard of the Hannibal?
Certainly would not want to comment on it.
You've never heard of the Hannibal Directive?
I thought you wanted to go out of the region.
Sure.
And for those of you listening to the podcast, while he's asking this question, you see the Hannibal Directive headlines from mainstream outlets. This is covered. These are even Israeli propaganda newspapers have covered the Hannibal Directive.
Let me be clear. Hamas using rape, sexual violence, and terrorism and torture of Israeli women and girls is appalling and unforgivable. And you should, when I was there, saw some of the photographs. And it's beyond comprehension.
We had 2 events last week. We had 3 panels about Ukraine, and they were superb. They went off without a hitch. We learned a lot and were challenged. 2 days later, we had panels on conflict-related sexual violence. It included Ukraine, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Israel. And it was protested. You just have to ask yourself how you could have an event focused on using rape as a tactic of war against women and girls, which is in conflict across the world, and you include the most recent horrendous example out of Israel, and that brings out the protesters. So there is an invidious strain of anti-Semitism that has never gone away, but we had hopes. It had been certainly submerged, that has been poking its head up for quite some time now.
15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, 3/4 of whom are women and children.
And it's horrible, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping
well, Dana, I
Palestinian
think
women.
we're not...
I could probably do entire monologues about each of those clips, but the last one with Dana Bash really gives up the game. Sure, Palestinians getting killed, it's terrible, but at least they aren't getting raped like Israeli women. In a lengthy investigation into abuse of Palestinians at an Israeli military base turned prison, they write that Palestinians were subjected to brutal beatings, electric shocks, intentional degradation, including being forced to wear only diapers, and sexual assault. Quote, Mr. Al-Hamlawi, the senior nurse, said a female officer had ordered 2 soldiers to lift him up and press his rectum against a metal stick that was fixed to the ground. He said the stick penetrated his rectum for roughly 5 seconds, causing it to bleed and leaving him with unbearable pain. But there will be no congressional resolutions about these assaults, no Sheryl Sandberg film, no convenings with Hillary Clinton to discuss why we should hashtag believe Palestinian men. Because Bibi and Biden, they never cared about human rights or protection from sexual assault. Hell, they don't even actually care about Israeli women since they're content to continue to let hostages languish in Gaza with no ceasefire deal. They care about cynical emotional manipulation for their own political ends and to justify their own atrocities. Conference about similar content. So let's take a listen to the segment and we can react on the other side.
What's worse, to get kidnapped, to be raped, or to get shot? That is a quote from Tali Biner. It's what she said she was asking herself amid the chaos at the Nova Music Festival in Israel on October 7th.
Those videos do not exist. The Congresswoman is lying. And again, this is not my words. I'm reading from the Pramila Patten, UN Special Representative, Sexual Violence and Conflict report. She says the mission team, specifically the forensic pathologist, the digital analyst, reviewed over 5,000 photos, around 50 hours, and several audio files of footage of the attacks provided by various state agencies through an independent online review of various open sources to identify potential instances and indications of conflict-related sexual violence. She goes on to say, while the mission team reviewed that extensive digital material depicting a range of egregious violations, no digital evidence specifically depicting acts of sexual violence was found in open sources.
Now let's talk about October 7th. October 7th is a atrocity. It's a terrorist attack. It's terrible. Anthony Blinken went on in front of Congress and he testified about an incident.
A family of four, a young boy and girl, 6 and 8 years old, and their parents around the breakfast table. The father, his eye gouged out in front of his kids. The mother's breast cut off. The girl's foot amputated. The boy's fingers cut off before they were executed. And then their executioners sat down and had a meal.
That is a direct testimony from Zaka and Hadzullah United.
They killed the husband first. They took his eyes out. I saw the body by myself. They cut the breast of the woman. They cut the leg of girl.
Two relief groups from Israel that they have actually been exposed that all of the stuff that they said has been lies, and they have collected more than $50 million of donations.
כן, אני אספתי ילדים ותינוקות בלי ראש.
Our volunteers, when they came into the homes and they saw the children beheaded, if they were not busy raping women, they would have continued to Jerusalem.
Because of these unverified lies, and this has been reported by the Israeli media, Haaretz, Channel 13, and Time of Israel.
ושם תופסות אותי עוד 2 תמונות, באמת, חוץ מתום, אין שם שום דבר אחר, שנשחטו ופשוט הרגו אותם.
אתה רואה את הילדים?
בית, 8 תינוקות. 8 תינוקות מתים.
נרצחו 8 תינוקות במעון בבארי מבהיר. ילדים, תינוקות שנתלו על חבל כביסה ממש בשורה אחת. אנחנו בכפר עזה, אבל לכפר עזה הבהירו מזמן שהאירוע הזה פשוט לא קרה.
Pregnant women, cut open.
גם זה לא קרה. לראות שגם בייחוד הצלה הפיצו בזמנו את הסיפור הפיקטיבי על כך שתינוק הושם בתוך תנור.
You've seen burn body, but in the same time in Israel people talk about the Hannibal Directive, where the Israelis went in and indiscriminately they shot Hellfire missiles from Apache. They shot shells from tanks. There is an Israeli survivor, her name is Yasmin Porat. She came on a podcast and she talked about being in a house with 14 other hostages and 40 terrorists, and said everybody was alive, and then the Israelis started to shooting all the 40 terrorists, and 12 out of the 14 hostages were killed. That's an 85% kill rate.
הטרוריסטים ירו בהם?
לא.
כל זה כוחותינו ירו בהם?
חד משמעית. לא היו כולם, כולל בני ערובה.
Now, let's talk about the decapitated babies. According to the official Israeli records, 1 baby was killed, Mila Cohen, 10 months, 12 children from the age to 2 to 9, 36 from the age from 12 to 19, a total of 49 innocent children who should never have been killed or even touched on that day. The biggest casualty was 421 people from the age of 20 or 40. The total number of people that killed with that day, 1,129 people. 373 of them were police and military, and 759 civilians. No rape, no decapitation, nothing. All of these were refuted. Even the New York Times piece and the Guardian retracted them because they were taken for rights. Does it make it less horrific that there are just 759 just killed, most of them killed by firepower from the Israeli? No, it's still horrific. But you created that image so people now are prepared and prepped to go in and kill everybody. This is blind rage. The 40 decapitated baby became a myth and everybody now believes. So if I talk about them, nobody wants to
I don't think everybody believes it.
But it was used as an emotional way to suck money, 50 million, and to allow people to say, all right, go and kill everybody. Right now, as we're speaking, the uncles and the cousins of my children in Gaza, They lost all of their homes. They are still alive. They are all now cramped in one apartment in one building in Rafah. And as we speak, one bomb can drop on them right now, annihilating my whole family. And that happened because of lies that were propagated, making people accept that Israel can go and do whatever they want.
They took the eyes out. Raping women.
The mother's breast cut off.
And pregnant women cut open.
Are you seriously keep on asking me about Palestinian civilians? What's wrong with you?
That's a shameful anti-Semitic equation.
When the ICC investigates Israel for fake war crimes, this is pure anti-Semitism.
From the river to the sea is anti-Semitic.
Those calling for a ceasefire are legitimizing anti-Semitism.
With Ukraine, there's been so much information that has been debunked. And the truth has come out about the true intentions of why these world governments have been all targeting Russia for a while.
It's difficult to look at the It's difficult to look at some of the images and imagine that any well-thinking, serious, mature leader would do that. So I can't talk to his psychology, but I think we can all speak to his depravity. This is war. It is combat. It is bloody. It is ugly, and it's going to be messy. And innocent civilians are going to be hurt going forward. I wish I could tell you something different. I wish that wasn't going to happen, but it is going to happen.
The difference in response is just nuts.
President Putin actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us. And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. So he went to war to prevent NATO, more NATO close to his borders.
Flashback.
This is fundamentally not about NATO expansion.
It was never about NATO enlargement.
It's not about NATO.
It's not about NATO expanding toward Russia.
This was never about NATO.
It's absolutely nothing to do with NATO expansionism.
And it has nothing to do with NATO.
This is not about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
It's not really about NATO.
This is not about NATO.
Seriously, it's not about NATO.
This was never about NATO.
It was never about NATO. Let's be honest.
This doesn't have anything to do with NATO.
Nothing to do with NATO at all.
Yeah, he's claiming it's like security purposes, but we can see the clear reason.
But NATO is not the reason.
This is not about NATO expansion. This is about the democratic expansion.
Ukraine bans religious organizations.
We are protecting democracy right now.
Ukraine is banning political parties.
Because it's a democracy.
Ukraine restricts books and music.
It's about democracy.
Ukraine won't hold elections.
It's about democracy.
And it's not about NATO expansion.
This war in Ukraine is not about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
That's not about NATO.
It has nothing to do with NATO.
Nothing to do with NATO expansion.
It's not about NATO expansion.
Nothing to do with NATO. It isn't really about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
It's not about NATO enlargement. In fact, it has nothing to do with NATO. It's not about NATO encroaching.
It's not about NATO. NATO is just as a fictitious, imaginary adversary for Mr. Putin and for Russia.
It was never about NATO. That's not what it's been about. It's been about him trying to expand his sphere of influence.
Hang on, I mean, the two are not mutually exclusive. Obviously, Russia has wished for a sphere of influence over Ukraine, but if the West had not challenged Russian interests so directly, I think that there was a chance to avoid this war.
He wanted us to sign a promise never to enlarge NATO. We rejected that.
The reason why Putin invaded Ukraine is because of his evil.
It's about that Putin wants to rebuild Soviet empire of evil, like President Reagan told.
It's about Putin being sick.
I don't know how you negotiate peace with a madman, but
Nobody negotiated with Hitler.
People are comparing him to Hitler. And remember Hitler.
He's a Hitler.
We're back when the Nazis invaded Poland.
This is exactly the same what Hitler was doing to Jews.
This is the same. Putin will not stop.
Putin is reminiscent of Hitler.
Hitler.
Reminds me of Hitler.
Hitler.
He's the new Hitler.
Well, Hitler.
This is about a butcher.
trying to kill people everywhere in the world, just not Ukraine, Syria, all over the place.
I hear you. Senator Lindsey Graham, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, straight ahead.
They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China. This is a very big deal how Ukraine ends. Let's help them win a war we can't afford to lose. Let's find a solution to this war. But they're sitting on a gold mine to give Putin $10 or $12 trillion of critical minerals that he will share with China is ridiculous.
How do you actually say Russia has a network of white supremacist groups that are going to commit terrorist acts when all over the media, including like the BBC and mainstream,
it's Trump's fault.
There's dudes with freaking Nazi symbols on their uniforms. Even the Western media has said point blank, the Christchurch shooter, Ukrainian neo-Nazi Azov battalion. Everyone knows the Azov battalion. Everyone sees the photos. What, did you see a Russian with a Nazi symbol on there?
Two words, dynamic narratives.
But it's like...
it's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy.
We make up stuff.
Square this circle.
They make up stuff as they go along. It can just flip it on its head from 1 week to the next. But what happened last year, what we said last year, what was true last year is no longer true if it doesn't fit the narrative.
And not only that, but John Kirby says, yeah, for the past 8 years, we're funding them.
We've been planning to have a war with Russia, is what he said.
And we've been planning to have a war
via Ukraine.
I would remind a couple of things. One, the Biden administration was flowing in weapons well before the invasion. The first $1 billion that the president committed to Ukraine did include lethal assistance, and that was before Putin decided to move in. Plus, we were very open and honest about what we were seeing the Russians do. And then the last point, which I don't think we keep in mind as much as we should, Neil, is the training and effort that went into getting the Ukrainians ready for this kind of war over the last 8 years. The United States, Canada, Britain, other allies really helped train the Ukrainians in small unit leadership, command and control, operational maneuver, the kinds of things you're seeing them do now. It's not just about the weapons. It's about the skills and the capabilities that they and the leadership that they're exerting on the battlefield. And that wasn't by accident. They really have transformed from a Soviet era, very Russian dominant sort of military, very top down, rigid doctrinal military, to one that's much more Western aligned in terms of the way they think and act and actually encourage initiative on the battlefield. Again, that wasn't an accident. That was the work of the United States and so many other allies over the last 8 years.
With smoke bombs and drums, some 3,000 members of Ukraine's nationalist Azov battalion marched through the capital, Kyiv. In a show of force, they lit flares outside the parliament building. It was a warning to the government against making any potential deal that would lead to elections in separatist-controlled territory of eastern Ukraine. The Azov battalion was formed in 2014 to fight Russia-backed separatists in Ukraine's east and is now part of the Interior Ministry's National Guard. They also called for Ukraine's borders to be fully restored. The battalion's leader vowed there would be more protests outside Parliament if the government failed to heed their warnings.
We had some amazing displays of democracy in the British Parliament this week. There's Boris Johnson with the color-coordinated Azov flag, coordinated with his suit and hair, and members of the neo-Nazi Azov battalion in Congress. And we've been hearing so much about anti-Semitism, but I haven't seen any major pro-Israel or Jewish group condemn this display of reverence for Nazism, for a battalion that was founded by Andrei Boletsky, who declared that its mission was to lead the white world in a crusade against the Untermenschen. That's Andrei Boletsky, who was honored with a Medal of Honor by Volodymyr Zelensky only a few months ago. What was Boris Johnson doing here, Aaron? I mean, what was the point of this?
Well, he's campaigning for increased
military assistance to Ukraine.
My message to you is very simple. Thank you to the heroes from the Azov Brigade who warned us about their presence tonight. Give the Ukrainians what they need. Give them the weapons. Give them the authorization to use those weapons outside their own borders if necessary. Now, absolutely ludicrous that Ukrainians should be forbidden from doing what Putin is doing himself and attacking Ukrainian forces. Why on earth shouldn't Ukrainians be able to attack Russian forces mustering on their borders? Give them those weapons, give them the attackers, give them the budget, give them the air defences that they need. It's the single best investment that we can make in the defence of the whole Euro-Atlantic area, is supporting Ukrainian heroes. We rely wholly on heroes such as the people who are here tonight with us from the Azov Brigade.
I mean, recall that the U.S. Congress banned assistance to the Azov Battalion because they are neo-Nazi. This was a law passed after many attempts by Congressmember John Conyers, late John Conyers. It finally passed a few years ago. It still, I believe, is on the books. I don't think it's been rescinded, but everyone just ignores it, and everyone just ignores that we used to openly call them what they are, which is neo-Nazi. And now that's all forgotten, and Boris Johnson can go and call them heroes and lobby for them to receive direct U.S. assistance to strike across the border.
Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland seemed to admit the quiet part out loud when it comes to United States investment in Ukraine.
By the way, we have to remember that the bulk of this money is going right back into the U.S. economy to make those weapons.
A standing ovation for Ilya Samoilenko, called sign Gandalf, officer of the Azov Regiment of the National Guard of Ukraine, defender of Mariupol.
Israeli Friends of Ukraine invited me to the country to have some interviews, some meetings, to show the real face of notoriously known Azov Regiment, because I present my unit right now. We're not the guys that the Russians have been telling that we are. We were invited to the Knesset, and that's a great honor. I visited Masada as a very sacred place.
Well, one of the most scandalous reports now shows that another key U.S. ally, Israel, is in fact arming some of these neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine who have carried out attacks on ethnic and religious minority groups, including the Roma and also Jews inside Ukraine. Journalist Asa Winstanley wrote about this for the website The Electronic Intifada in an article titled, "Israel is Arming Neo-Nazis in Ukraine." Asa Winstanley's report reveals that the neo-Nazi militia, the Azov Battalion, which is part of the Ukrainian National Guard, posted online propaganda, including video showing it using Israeli Tavor rifles. As I said, the Azov Battalion, which began as a neo-Nazi militia, is now incorporated into the Ukrainian National Guard and is fighting pro-Russian separatists. And in Asa Winstanley's report, he also quotes a letter from the Israeli Defense Ministry that it wrote in response to a lawyer who had requested an end to Israeli military aid to Ukraine, citing the reports of Nazis attacking Ukrainian Jews and also Roma in Ukraine. Joining us to discuss this is Max Blumenthal. Max is an award-winning journalist and the editor and founder of the website The Gray Zone Project, where he has reported extensively on the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. Max, previously here at The Real News, reported on how the United States has directly armed Nazis in Ukraine by arming the Azov Battalion. And in fact, the Azov Battalion has posted photos on its website showing it meeting with American military officials. So today we're going to talk about how Israel, which claims to defend international Jewry, is in fact arming Nazis in Ukraine. Thanks for joining us, Max.
Great to be on.
So can you just respond to this shocking report from Asa Winstanley that Israel, which again claims to speak on behalf of international Jewry, is arming anti-Semitic, violent neo-Nazis in Ukraine?
Yeah, it would be shocking if to those who didn't know Israel's history. This actually didn't shock me at all, especially given the fact that U.S. Congress has enacted a prohibition on selling arms to the Azov Battalion this year, thanks to the efforts of Representative Ro Khanna. I'll explain why a little bit later. But just to summarize this really excellent report by Asa Winstanley, which is really authoritative in explaining the origins and ideology of Azov and the danger they present to Ukraine and to Europe as a whole. The Defense Ministry of Israel has confirmed several shipments of arms and tenders for weapon sales to Ukraine, to the Ukrainian military. The Azov Battalion has posted photos of its soldiers on its own YouTube channel and social media channels with the Tavor rifle. And the Tavor rifle is one of the most distinctive weapons in the Israeli arsenal. It is the standard issue rifle for Israeli soldiers. And, it was recently used in some of the atrocities committed on the border of Gaza. And it replaced the Uzi, which is another really distinctive Israeli weapon. So there's no mistake here. This is clearly an Israeli weapon, and it reflects what was seen in the Israeli Defense Ministry documents, which were turned up by Israeli human rights lawyers and were obtained by ASA and the Electronic Intifada. And basically, the Israeli Defense Ministry has refused to deny shipping weapons to the Azov Battalion. The reason that they have kind of some plausible deniability about directing weapons to neo-Nazis is that the Azov Battalion has been incorporated into Ukraine's National Guard through the Interior Ministry, which is run by an ultra-right nationalist named Arsen Avakov. So Israel's basically just sending weapons to the Ukrainian military, which is now filled with hardcore neo-Nazi ideologues. But there's no disputing the truth of the headline to Asa Winstanley's article. Israel is arming neo-Nazis in Ukraine. The self-proclaimed Jewish state is literally arming neo-Nazis. And that should shock everyone, but at the same time, it's not shocking given Israel's history, which I can kind of briefly explain. But Canada recently sent its military attaché, Colonel Brian Irwin, to meet with Azov officers. And Canada has had to actually defend this meeting in an official statement to Asa Winstanley. And they said that, this is absolutely pathetic. They said, I'm not quoting directly, I'm paraphrasing, that they aim to encourage diversity and tolerance in Ukraine through these person-to-person contacts. So, there's nothing like arming neo-Nazis to encourage tolerance, is there? It actually speaks to the ideological tendencies of the foreign minister of Canada, who is a Canadian-Ukrainian, Chrystia Freeland, whose grandfather was a Nazi.
The federal liberals under attack from opposition parties and Jewish groups after a Ukrainian veteran who served in a Nazi military unit in World War II wasn't just invited to hear Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky speak in Parliament on Friday, but received a standing ovation from all sides of the House of Commons.
In his remarks, Mr. Rota said that he fought against the Russians. Well, he was a part of the 1st Ukrainian Division, which is also known as the 14th Division of the Waffen-SS, which was a Nazi division. And how do we know that Mr. Hunka was a part of that? Well, he's posted about it extensively on the internet. He put a number of blog posts up in 2011 discussing his involvement in it. There's a key quote I want to read for you here. In July 1941, the German army occupied Barhanzi, which is a city in Ukraine where he's from. We greeted the German soldiers with joy, he said. He also posted a number of pictures of him in 1943 when he signed up to fight alongside this 14th Waffen-SS division, including pictures of him training in Munich in 1943. So there is clearly no doubt from his own words that he has associations with this Nazi division.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian-Canadian World veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. I wish to make a brief statement. I wish to apologize to the House. No one, including you, my fellow parliamentarians, or the Ukraine delegation, was privy to my remarks prior to their delivery.
What he has done has caused an international incident. It is not just a domestic error. This is an error with international global ramifications. He has walked basically into a diplomatic landmine. Yesterday, in an interview with the Polish ambassador to Canada, the Polish ambassador actually said, in our opinion, this man, this 98-year-old Ukrainian veteran, should have never been invited into Parliament in the first place. Not only that, he should be prosecuted. And then today, we understand that the Polish education minister now is asking for the extradition of this 98-year-old military veteran to Poland to face charges on war crimes.
Judy, has Canada reached out to Poland? Have we heard from the Prime Minister on that front?
The Prime Minister has not said anything about Poland specifically. This is an issue of geopolitical importance. Poland ambassador to Canada made this point to CTV News and on Question Period that he feels that an apology is also owed to Poland because in the area in which that Nazi unit was fighting, the SS Galician, that area is now Poland. So basically, what the Polish ambassador said was that, you know what, not only did Jews die at the hands of this voluntary military Nazi unit, but so did Poles. And that should be acknowledged. And that hasn't been acknowledged yet by any parliamentarian. They focused mainly on apologizing to Jewish survivors, to Jewish family members, as well as to Canadians who fought against the Nazis. But they have not made a specific apology to Poland.
Hey there, how you doing? I'm not shaking your hand, bro. You're a piece of man.
Why is that, sir?
You the entire country. You got our buddy over there.
Yeah, but how did I mess up this country?
Can anybody afford a home in this day? You're charging people carbon tax. You got 9 V8s here idling for 30 minutes. Your carbon footprint is increasing. We're getting charged for what?
You know what we're doing?
It's not stopping. No
We're putting a price on pollution,
right?
And we're returning it to families like
I don't think so. You're sending it over to Ukraine, right?
No.
Yeah. You send it over to the guy that you were with that slaughtered his own country.
You've been listening to Putin, have you?
Putin? No. We definitely don't listen to.
Отвратительным выглядит то, что все аплодировали этому нацисту. И особенно президент Украины, в жилах которого течет еврейская кровь, еврей по национальности, стоит и аплодирует нацисту, не просто последующему нацистов, не просто идейному последователю, а именно человеку, который своими руками уничтожал еврейское население. Это он лично уничтожал. Если спикер канадского парламента говорит о том, что во время Второй мировой войны этот канадско-украинский или украино-канадский нацист сражался против русских во время Второй мировой войны, он не может не понимать, что он сражался на стороне Гитлера, а не на стороне его собственной родины, Канады. Или был фашистским коллаборационистом. В любом случае сражался на стороне нацистских войск. Допустим, он этого не знает Я ни в коем случае не хочу обидеть чувства канадского народа. Мы относимся к Канаде, несмотря ни на что, с уважением, особенно к людям. Но если он не знает, что во время войны против России сражался Гитлер и его приспешники, то он идиот. Он, значит, просто в школе не учился, не имеет элементарных знаний. А если он знает, что этот человек сражался на стороне Гитлера, и называет его героем Украины и героем Канады, то он негодяй. Или так, или так.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he never planned to honor the 2014-2015 Minsk agreements to create peace between Russia, he said in a recent interview with a German magazine. Now, while he never planned to honor the agreements, he was elected on the promise of ending the Donbas war. In the interview, Zelensky also reportedly accused the West of being insufficiently supportive of Ukraine, despite the billions of dollars the U.S. has sent in aid before the war began last year and ever since.
Angela Merkel said something about the Minsk Agreement of 2014. She said, and I quote, "The Minsk Agreement of 2014 was actually meant to give Ukraine precious time to become stronger. Now the question is, to become stronger for what? To prepare Ukraine for a war with Russia. Now this automatically reveals the intention of the West. The Russia-Ukraine war was already pre-planned by United States and European countries. Angela Merkel has been in power for over 16 years. Therefore she knows what she is speaking. And I personally feel she spoke the truth."
Roman Protasevich muss sofort wieder freigelassen werden. Alle anderen Erläuterungen für diese Landung des Ryanair-Flugzeuges sind vollkommen unglaubwürdig. Das Gleiche gilt für seine Partnerin Sofia Sapega.
When you're a high-ranking official talking about diplomatic efforts in Ukraine, the last thing you want to do is drop your guard.
From the Maidan Revolution in 2014, the US State Department and CIA staged a coup to overthrow the government in the Ukraine. The neo-Nazi Azov battalion were used as muscle, and the regiment was supplied with weapons from the military-industrial complex, and still are. The Azov battalion and regiment received backing from Ukraine's interior minister in 2014, as the government had recognized its own military was too weak to fight off the pro-Russian separatists, and relied on paramilitary volunteer forces. These forces were privately funded by oligarchs, the most known being Igor Kolomoisky, an energy magnate billionaire and then governor of the Dnipropetrovsk region. The fact that a Jewish oligarch is funding neo-Nazi paramilitary forces should give some pause for thought. In addition to Azov, Kolomoisky funded other volunteer battalions such as the Dnipro 1 and Dnipro 2, Ada and Donbass units. Azov received early funding and assistance from another oligarch, Serhiy Taruta, the billionaire governor of Donetsk region. In 2015, Andriy Dyachenko, the spokesperson for the regiment at the time, said that 10 to 20% of Azov's recruits were Nazis. The unit has denied publicly that it adheres to Nazi ideology, but Nazi symbols such as the swastika and SS regalia are rife on the uniforms and bodies of Azov members. For example, the uniform carries the neo-Nazi wolf's angel symbol, which is a black swastika on a yellow background. In January 2018, Azov rolled out its street patrol unit called National Druzhina to restore order in Ukraine's capital. Instead, the unit carried out pogroms, which is a violent riot, incited with the aim of massacring or expelling an ethnic or religious group, particularly Jews. In this case, they went after the Roma community and attacked members of the LGBTQ community. Maybe that's something to bear in mind for all the people flying the Ukrainian flag together with the pride flag in their bio on social media. Ukraine is the world's only nation to have a neo-Nazi formation in its armed forces, a correspondent for the US-based magazine called The Nation wrote in 2019. How could the neo-Nazi movement get such influence in the Ukraine? Well, let's have a listen to a leaked intercepted conversation between Victoria Nuland, lead US point person for the 2014 Maidan Revolution, and Jeffrey Pyatt, the United States ambassador to Ukraine. The call took place in January 2014, right before the protest movement started to escalate.
What do you think?
I think we're in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as deputy prime minister. And you've seen some of my notes on the troubles in the marriage right now, so we're trying to get a read really fast on where he is on this stuff. But I think your argument to him, which you'll need to make, I think that's the next phone call we want to set up, is exactly the one you made to Yachts. And I'm glad you sort of put him on the spot on where he fits in this scenario. And I'm very glad he said what he said in response.
Good. So I don't think Kleitsch should go into the government. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you think, what, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be Tony Book and his guys. And, you know, I'm sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating on all of this.
I think Yachts is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's the guy, you know, what he needs is Kleitsch and Tony Book on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week. You know, I just think Kleitsch going in, he's going to be at that level working for Yatsenyuk. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Okay, good. Well, do you want us to try to set up a call with him as the next step?
My understanding from that call, but you tell me, was that the big three were going into their own meeting, and that Yachts was going to offer in that context a three-way, you know, the 3+1 conversation or 3+2 with you. Is that not how you understood it?
No, I mean, that's what he proposed, but I think just knowing the dynamic that's been with them where Klitschko has been the top dog, he's going to take a while to show up for whatever meeting they've got, and he's probably talking to his guys at this point. So I think you reaching out directly to him helps with the personality management among the three, and it gives you also a chance to move fast on all this stuff and put us behind it before they all sit down and he explains why he doesn't like it.
Okay, good. I'm happy. Why don't you reach out to him and see if he wants to talk before or after?
Okay, will do. Thanks.
Okay, I've now written, one more wrinkle for you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I told you this or if I only told Washington this, that when I talked to Jeff Feltman this morning, he had a new name for the UN guy, Robert Seri. Did I write you that this morning?
Yeah, okay. I saw that.
He's now gotten both Seri and Ban Ki-moon to agree that Seri could come in Monday or Tuesday.
Okay.
So that would be great, I think, to help glue this thing and have the UN help glue it. And, you know, fuck the EU.
No, exactly. And I think we've got to do something to make it stick together, because you can be pretty sure that if it does start to gain altitude, the Russians will be working behind the scenes to try to torpedo it. And again, the fact that this is out there right now, I'm still trying to figure out in my mind why Yanukovych did that. But in the meantime, there's a Party of Regions faction meeting going on right now, and I'm sure there's a lively argument going on in that group at this point. But anyway, we could land jelly side up on this one if we move fast. So let me work on Klitschko, and if you can just keep, I think we want to try to get somebody with an international personality to come out here and help to midwife this thing. And then the other issue is some kind of outreach to Yanukovych, but we probably regroup on that tomorrow as we see how things start to fall into place.
So on that piece, Jeff, when I wrote the note, Sullivan's come back to me, VFR, saying you need Biden, and I said probably tomorrow for an attaboy and to get the deets to stick. So
okay.
Biden's willing.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thanks.
I was waiting for the communist call. I didn't ask for sunshine and I got World War III. I'm looking over the wall and you're looking at me.
Of course, it's all just a conspiracy theory. What about the Ukraine and biological weapons? Just another conspiracy theory. Right? But let's make sure and check in with Victoria Nuland again. The following recording is from a hearing in the US Senate in March of 2022.
I only have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
There is no doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning.
There is a suggestion for Nuland to contact Klitschko directly to play to his top dog sensibilities, while Nuland refers to getting the United Nations involved in a political solution. And that's where the unfortunate comment arises.
I'm obviously not going to comment on private diplomatic conversations, other than to say it was pretty impressive tradecraft. The audio was extremely clear. Hello, how are you? Good to see you. We're here from America. Would you like some bread? Please take something.
Thank you for coming here.
This was Nuland and Pyatt visiting Independence Square in Kiev in December, handing out food to protesters and police. This latest episode is embarrassing for the US and allows Russia to argue that the opposition is being manipulated by Washington, something that Barack Obama has always denied. The clip was said to have been posted online by the Russian deputy PM, but that has not yet been confirmed.
Igor Kolomoisky, Ukraine's best-known oligarch, has a complicated history with the president. For years, Zelensky's company has produced shows for Kolomoisky's biggest TV channel, 1+1. In 2019, Kolomoisky's media channels gave a big boost to Zelensky's presidential campaign. After Zelensky's victory, Kolomoisky kept up his relationship with the president, nominating over 30 lawmakers to Zelensky's newly established party, and maintaining influence with many of them in parliament. He also backed a new political project, which has 24 lawmakers. The first year of Zelensky's rule was a revival for Kolomoisky. The oligarch was able to secure control over Ukernafta, a state-owned petroleum producer where he owns a minority stake. In 2020, Ukernafta was supposed to be cleared of all debt and receive a new independent director. Kolomoisky was able to stall the process and keep a favorable CEO in place. Until recently, Kolomoisky held his grip on another state company, Centrenergo, which controls 15% of Ukraine's energy production. After Zelensky took office, Kolomoisky began milking Centrenergo by selling it overpriced gas and receiving cheap electricity in return. Kolomoisky even helped sack the pro-reform government of Prime Minister Oleksiy Goncharuk, who tried to pry the oligarch's grip from Centrenergo.
Ждете, я вам скажу, будет это или нет. Кофе будешь пить?
Это ваших рук?
Кофе будешь пить?
Пойдемте пить кофе.
Да, это наших рук дело.
Слава нашим виробникам! Слава! Слава! Слава!
Спасибо. И вам спасибо за сотрудничество. Тебя Коломойского, блядь, надо увидеть. Сидишь тут, блядь, и караулишь, блядь. Как тёлка, блядь, своего неверного мужа.
Ukraine's parliament has given initial approval to a law that would ban religious organizations with connections to the Kremlin. Kiev accuses the Ukrainian Orthodox Church specifically of collaborating with Russia after its invasion of Ukraine last year. The church has said it's not aligned with the Russian Orthodox Church. A second reading of the bill is needed before it becomes law.
If you've forgotten who she is, let me introduce you to Marina. This is the Marina we're talking about, the so-called artist who has decades of offensive, very satanic-appearing art that is especially suspect when it comes to children. Here's some of her art. This photo says, with a sharp knife cut deeply into the middle finger of the left hand, eat the pain. I'm not even going to attempt to describe what's going on in this. That's a bunch of children's bodies, and that over there is a bone that's been shredded. Let's pretend there's nothing weird about this lady and it's all just an act. Why would she be the person you'd ask to help be an ambassador to rebuild schools with vulnerable children in them? There's also a photo of her with a nude child that I'm not even going to put on here because it is absolutely disgusting that they consider it art. So I'll show you this instead. This doesn't scream, I know how to rebuild schools to me. How about you? She certainly wouldn't be my choice, but what do you guys think? What expertise does Marina have that qualifies her to help rebuild schools for children in Ukraine? Let me know in the comments.
The evening, the Israeli and Ukrainian presidents gathered for an official ceremony for the unveiling of a new interactive memorial, Crystal Wall of Crying, by world-renowned performance artist Marina Abramovic. The wall is meant to be a symbolic extension of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem and incorporates crystals from the Ukraine and Brazil in an interactive installation. The 40-meter-long structure now stands in a park built over the site of the Babin Yar ravine.
It's a really wall for healing, and it's wall to remember, and it's wall to public to actually interact all the time. It's not something, I don't like monuments that you have the huge monument and you stand in the front and you look to the monument. It's just like you're voyeur. Here you have to touch, you have to interact, you have to turn, and you have to, confront yourself with yourself and your own memory. So it's a very different way of seeing art and seeing the monuments.
At the ceremony, both Israeli and Ukrainian presidents also warned against repeating the mistakes of the past and cautioned against a new surge of anti-Semitism.
More dangerous than Hamas, more dangerous than Muslim neighbors are internal these, and there's another biblical name, these who say they are Jews and are not.
I was going to ask you about that. In Revelation 3:8, I think, I was going to ask you that question. Does that refer to this time, or can it refer to this time?
It can. It's Revelation 3:9. Indeed, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. Yeah. And there's a different application for it, but we understand this is really there's a practical storyline I've shared before on a program maybe a year ago, I don't know, about the Khazarian mafia and the Khazarian Jews, and I'll just say the briefest understanding of it and how this applies to them, because it's about 1,000 years ago. Really, these are almost like marauding tribes, not like tribes of the tribe of Israel, but they're based out of the Ukraine, ironically or not, based out of Kiev. And these were those that would go around, take new lands, and they were known, they had brought the Babylonian religion with them. They were doing cannibalism, human trafficking, no boundaries, sex interaction. They were so wicked that the story goes that he who led, I believe he was a czar of Russia, when he had won a battle against him, gave him an option. And in some way or another, this is a truth that they were told, again, 1,000 years ago, you must choose a religion. You all are worthless people. You're not training your kids into any kind of civility, reasonableness. And he gave them a choice of the three Abrahamic religions, and the three Abrahamic religions being either, at the time we'd say Catholicism, Christianity, the other one is Islam, and the other was Judaism. And so they, in a very pragmatic way, the Khazarians chose Judaism because the Pope and the Vatican, they were very hands-on, forcible conversions. And so it was not a light thing to go under that, nor was it Islam. It's a heavy yoke on both, and so Judaism would leave them alone, and so they did some things of incorporating some level of they weren't, first of all, they were not Semite.
But, I mean, you're literally denying their existence now. I mean, you are just a brazen anti-Semite, aren't you? You hate Jewish people. You hate Israel. You hate the state of Israel, its government, everything about it. You're blaming them. You blame them in this interview for literally absolutely everything.
When you say, well, I think most of the problems today is caused by Jewish supremacy. I believe that.
Europe! Europe! This is Europe! Europe! Europe!
Только там 1488. Там лежит, что...
1488.
Ну, потому что это 16-го года, я там молодой, глупый был.
Нацик, бля?
Бывший, сейчас нет. Ну и как понять нацик, я понять не могу, что такое нацик.
Фашист, бля?
Нет.
Да хули нет, бля? Что такое 1488?
Это...
4 слов Дэвида Лейна, бля. И 88, блядь, это порядка номер букв латинского алфавита. Хай Гитлер, бля. Хули нет, бля?
Я об этом не знал.
Germany shows its leadership in the support for Ukraine. Germany is the biggest European contributor of military aid to Ukraine. You just decided to send a third Patriot system to Ukraine. And I strongly believe that other allies should follow the example of Germany.
Що ти з'їгу кинув? Андрійко! Ти чого з'їгу кинув? Бери булочку, чекай, я вкушу. Андрій, ну давай ще раз. Єбать, ти з'їгу кинув, бро, хорош.
You harassed us on the beach.
Yeah, I would say it.
Huh? And we have it on video. We have it on video.
For me, this
Can you say Israel,
yeah?
Huh?
For me, this land is for Israel, yeah? They buy it, yeah?
Oh, wow.
Otherwise, there's another party.
Well, you're sick, man. You're sick.
I'm sick.
Yeah, you're sick.
Take a little politics. You know what's happening in your country?
Oh,
but you
God.
know nothing, yeah?
Yeah, I
You're
know.
child, you're child,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
don't have a break.
And you're a
You're
man-child.
living like I'm living in paradise, I have a so super nice life, but you don't know nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah? What's
Yeah.
then your religion?
Yes.
Yeah? Your
Yes.
religion person, what?
Yes.
You don't know nothing about.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
like animals.
Yeah, yeah.
And you try to make it from me something like I make it something else that only I tell you.
Или построим на территории Украины новое государство Израиль, Израиль 2.0 называется, либо Украина исчезнет как государство. Михаил Дубинянский, вот автор этой статьи, он ушел от вопроса. Он предлагает построить Израиль на месте всей страны, что я считаю политически безграмотно, и это большая политическая ошибка. Потому что новый Израиль 2.0 должен построен быть на месте, как Небесный Иерусалим, вместо 5 южных областей, на месте 5 южных областей Украины. Но то, что главная украинская политическая газета печатает программную статью, с которой согласна редколлегия, это говорит о том, что наши 1,5 года нашей работы по продвижению проекта «Небесный Иерусалим» не прошли даром.
Всем шалом. Я Роза Розенфельд, референт проекта «Небесный Иерусалим». Я буду с вами в течение сегодняшнего интервью, и я надеюсь, вам понравится. Располагайтесь поудобнее перед вашими телевизионными приемниками. Желаю вам приятного просмотра.
You know that one time when the US helped neo-Nazis overthrow a democratically elected president? Do you know what country I'm talking about? But before we get started, you should brush up on basic facts about the US's involvement in regime change throughout history, because we've been doing this all over the world for more than 100 years now. Although we sped up considerably after World War II with the founding of the CIA. That brings us to Allen Dulles, the godfather of the CIA, who was a very wealthy and influential businessman, largely because of his deep ties to big Nazi money before and after World War II, and I guess during too, actually. And after World War II, the CIA helped set up a whole bunch of what they called stay-behind operations, which is just a way of saying they funded militias that were mostly leftovers from the Nazi party in Europe, because the Nazis hated communism, and so they just were like, yeah, these guys are useful, let's keep them around. We also poached all the Nazi scientists during Operation Paperclip. And so all of that is just to set the stage and remind you that the US is great at overthrowing governments, usually democratically elected ones, usually because they are too friendly with Russia. And the anecdote is usually to put dictators and far-right extremists in power that will bend the knee to the US. And also just to remind you, refresh you, that the CIA and the US in general have no qualms about working with Nazis and neo-Nazis. So, now it's time to learn the real history of the war in Ukraine. Because apparently Putin nearly bored Tucker to death with a 2-hour-long history lesson, so we'll do it faster and with sources. Maybe I'll get my very own smear article from the Daily Beast. So in 2010, Ukraine elected this guy, Viktor Yanukovych, to be their president, in what were hailed as remarkably democratic elections, given the awful state of Ukraine at the time. Yanukovych happens to be from Donetsk Oblast, where he was previously the governor. That would be this dark red one, where Russian is the native language of more than 75% of the population. In fact, this whole side of Ukraine is largely ethnically Russian. And he was logically very pro-Russia. I mean, like, they are literal neighbors. But anyways, that was not cool with the US. And it was also not cool with all of the Nazis in Ukraine, like tons of Nazis. And if there's one thing the CIA is good at, it's at not letting a good revolution go to waste. And they actually were totally out in the open this time. John McCain himself went and dined with the opposition leaders, including the far-right Svoboda Party, which would eventually take over. He literally shared a stage at the public protests with the leader of this party. This is back in December of 2013, leading up to the US-backed coup in 2014. And back then, everyone knew that Ukraine had a real Nazi problem. Here's the EU talking about it back in 2014. The Svoboda Party is a far-right party launched in 1991, and it took on this swastika-like symbol composed of I and an N, which stood for Idea Nazi, or Idea of the Nation. Literally, that was their logo, until they had a whole rebranding later on. Like, for real, this was an actual Nazi symbol used by Nazi divisions called the Wolfsnagel during World War II, and that is the Svoboda Party's symbol. This article is also from 2014 originally, updated in 2017. Regrettably, the vaccine against the virus of Nazism produced at the Nuremberg Tribunal is losing its original strength in some parts of European countries. That's a quote from Vladimir Putin. Remember when Canada got all confuffled because they accidentally had a standing ovation for a Nazi war criminal when baby boy Ukraine came to give a little speech and they all stood up and applauded the old Nazi war criminal? If that was confusing to you as to why and how that would happen, the answer is because a ton of people from Ukraine are old Nazi war criminals. Ukraine is full of Nazis. In fact, most of Ukraine's military fighting power is because of Azov Battalion, which is the direct descendant of the Svoboda Party that took over in the 2014 coup. Azov actually reached out around the world and recruited neo-Nazis from foreign countries to come get training to fight in Ukraine. They were banned from Facebook for racist and anti-Semitic content. They titled one of their pages Gas Chambers. But when Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and we all wanted to make a lot of money off of it, some media outlets changed the way they described Azov and Ukraine in general. German state-owned media outlets like Deutsche Welle, which once described Azov as a neo-Nazi regiment, soon began labeling allegations of neo-Nazism as Russian propaganda. My, that's a familiar story. Because the United States literally, openly, financially, and politically supported a neo-Nazi militia terrorist group to take over the government of a democratic Ukraine. And then, Crimeans, who are ethnically Russian, voted overwhelmingly to join Russia. And then the bulk of Western media abandoned any hint of even remotely balanced journalism. And now we're comparing Putin to Hitler and completely ignoring the actual neo-Nazis that are committing pogroms on the streets of Ukraine. The leader of Ukraine's most distinguished fighting battalion, Azov Battalion, once wrote that Ukraine's mission is to, quote, lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen. He is now a deputy in Ukraine's parliament. And the stories of Ukrainian Nazism are not coming from Russian media. They're coming from Western media, like Radio Free Europe, like Jewish organizations like the World Jewish Congress and the Simon Wentz whatever center, watchdogs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and Freedom House. Post-Maidan Ukraine is the world's only nation to have a neo-Nazi formation in its official armed forces. And sorry, if you don't know what I mean when I say post-Maidan Ukraine, that might be because they decided on a more nice sounding Wikipedia name. They called it the Revolution of Dignity instead of the original name, the Maidan Revolution. Because when neo-Nazis take over a democratic government, it should be called the Revolution of Dignity. So now put yourself in Putin's shoes in 2014. The CIA has just overthrown the government of your next door neighbor. Think Russia overthrowing the government of Mexico. And they have installed a Nazi party as the head of it. And then that Nazi party is going through the streets where they're all ethnic Russians and killing people. I mean, not to mention the NATO connection that now NATO is talking about getting in on Ukraine. I'm not trying to say that Putin is a good guy or that he's never done anything bad. I'm trying to say that literally every single thing that you could say that Putin has done that is bad, the United States government also does all the time. And from a geopolitics standpoint, the outcome of that is obvious. It started in 2014. And no shit, Putin was going to do something about it. Everyone knew that Putin was going to do something about it ever since 2014. But we didn't ignore it because we didn't think it was true. The United States did it because we wanted this outcome. We're going to briefly skip over the whole part where the Biden family, the Biden vice presidency, was actually very distinctly involved in the build-up to the Ukraine war throughout his vice presidency and all of the kickbacks that his family got from that involvement. And we'll skip straight to the money that is getting raked in by the military-industrial complex ever since the start of the Ukraine war in 2022. US government-approved arms sales just to NATO allies went from $15 billion to $28 billion. Private sales directly from military contractors to foreign governments went from $103 billion to $153 billion. And all the while, all the corporate shill-ass media reports it as though beating Russia in the arms market is part of a wider effort to isolate Moscow and its manufacturing capacity to weaken its forces arrayed against Ukraine. Quick! Enrich the defense contractors for democracy. The only way to save democracy is to give billions of dollars to Lockheed Martin. Otherwise, Putin is gonna win. Except that Putin has said many times that he is willing to negotiate. He's happy to negotiate. He doesn't even want to take over all of Ukraine. He just wants that port right there and these Russians to be safe and NATO to stay the fuck away. He does not give a shit about Ukraine. He definitely doesn't give a shit about invading any other countries. He does not want that. Russia is the biggest country in the world by a long shot, and almost all of it is uninhabited. They have more natural resources than anyone else. They have tons of their own problems to deal with. And they certainly don't want a nuclear conflict with other major world powers. And to this day, basically everything that Americans have been told about this conflict is complete propaganda. And the number one rule of propaganda is you need a boogeyman. Once the Cold War ended, they needed a new one. So we had Osama bin Laden. Once Osama bin Laden ended, they needed a new one. So we went back to Putin. Nancy Pelosi actually tried to claim that pro-Palestine protests were Putin's propaganda machine. Anything that they don't like is because of Putin, which is why they came out guns blazing against this interview, because everything that they have been telling you about this is propaganda and lies.
Russia has evolved in a substantial way. Russia at one point was controlled by the Bolsheviks until pretty much the end of the communist empire, the fall of the USSR in 1991. And that was a very pivotal shift, I think. Vladimir Putin at that time, as he was coming up later to rise into prominence, maybe around 95, 94, 96, when he got around into office, he pretty much began to shift Russia back to the way Russia has always been. He's a strong Orthodox Christian. He's brought them back to their Tsar legacy. But to some parts of the world, they think Russia is still this communist place. He knows all the mistakes that communism has made because it couldn't get any worse than what it actually did get to. And he learned from that.
Решение о национализации этой библиотеки было принято советским правительством, первым советским правительством, и членами его являлись примерно на 80-85% евреи. Но они же, руководствуясь ложными идеологическими соображениями, шли тогда на аресты и репрессии и иудеев, и православных, и представителей других конфессий, мусульман. Они всех гребли под одну гребенку. И вот эти идеологические шоры и ложные идеологические установки, они, слава Богу...
Why Hitler hated Jews? You're not going to believe it. He wrote in his book, the Jews are the biggest threat. Why? Because they are communists. They are anti-God. They are the enemies of God. Well, the Jews that he knew, most of them, that's what they were. And he started to describe how they made the revolution in Russia. And he started to give proofs that the Jews are a big danger to Germany. Bolsheviks. They are the biggest threat to Germany. If we don't kill them now, they'll kill us all. They'll do to us what they did in Russia. That's what he wrote in his book. I never knew it until a few days ago.
היטלר טוען בספר שלו שהיהודים הם קומוניסטים. הם עשו את המהפכה ברוסיה. הם הרגו שם 30 מיליון רוסים, את כל האינטליגנציה, בצורה אכזרית ונוראה. ואת זה הם רוצים לעשות לכל העולם. הארץ הבאה בתור זה גרמניה. הם הקימו את המפלגה הקומוניסטית והסוציאליסטית הגרמנית, וזה נכון. אם אנחנו לא נתגבר עליהם עכשיו, הם יחסלו אותנו וישחטו גם כאן 20 מיליון איש את כל האינטליגנציה. וככה הם הלכו מארץ לארץ. כשבסופו של דבר האינטליגנטים היחידים, החכמים היחידים, יהיו רק היהודים. והוא חוזר על זה הרבה פעמים, שלא תהיה טעות. והוא צודק.
Because all the people that had the money, that lent the money out, were Jews. He didn't like it. So he said no more interest. Why? Because of the high interest that the Jews charged people was so high, it ruined, it destroyed the economy in Germany. They destroyed, just like they destroyed Russia a few years before that through their communism over there. Jews destroyed Russia, not Goyim. Jews destroyed. Communism is by Jews. Well, don't let anybody confuse you. You look at history, Karl Marx, all the other Reshaim, they're all Jews. Wicked, but nonetheless Jews. They destroyed Russia, and he wrote in chapter 2 of Mein Kampf, they destroyed Russia, now they're destroying Germany, that's why I have to destroy them.
הוא צודק. את המהפכה ברוסיה עשו היהודים. את הצבא הרוסי בנה טרוצקי. הוא הקים את היפסס כהבריה, המחלקה היהודית של המפלגה הקומוניסטית. בתמונה של פוליט ביורו הראשון, זה כמו הממשלה ברוסיה, מתוך 13 חברים, 6 יהודים. מי הקים את הקג"ב? לפני כן קראו לו אין כבודל. יהודים. אם כן, הדברים טובים מפורש. הוא לא שנא את היהודים בגלל שיש להם פאות. הוא לא שנא אותם בגלל שהם שומרים מצוות. בגלל שהם קומוניסטים. והוא כותב כאן בצורה ברורה. היהודים הרסו את הדת ואת האמונה. הם הפיצו בגרמניה את הכפירה באלוקים. את זה הוא כותב כאן. אתם מבינים עכשיו למה לא לומדים את זה בית ספר? כי מי כותב את תוכניות הלימודים? אותם שמאלנים. הרסו את כל הערכים. הרעילו את כל הספרות והתיאטרון. מתוך 9 עיתונים גדולים בגרמניה, 7 של יהודים. הוא צודק.
Who knows the first 2 laws that Hitler implemented? Hitler, Yimach Shemo v'Zichro, first 2 laws that Hitler implemented that not only put him in a different status than everybody else for the rest of history, but also made what's called until this day the biggest financial miracle in history. Who knows the first 2 laws? Before the Nuremberg laws. Before that, we're talking about years before it. Hitler first comes into power. What's the first 2 laws? Okay, I'll save you the time. Rule number 1. No more pornography. No more homosexuality. None of that garbage. Not allowed. Berlin, in the 30s, in the 20s, was the Sodom and Gomorrah of the day. They were the Las Vegas of the day. They were the Sodom and Gomorrah of the day. Homosexuality, pornography, all the bestiality, all the garbage of the world, that was the capital of the world. He outlawed it. You're no longer allowed, closed all the bars, all the gay clubs, all the production, which were all run by Jewish people. Unfortunately. Second rule. What's the second rule? Second rule was, you're not allowed to charge interest. No more interest. Now you would think, why? What does he care about interest? Well, because all the people that had the money, that lent the money out, were Jews. He didn't like it. So he said no more interest. Why? Because of the high interest that the Jews charged people was so high, it ruined, it destroyed the economy in Germany. They destroyed, just like they destroyed Russia a few years before that, through their communism over there. Jews destroyed Russia. Not Goyim. Jews destroyed. Communism is by Jews. Well, don't let anybody confuse you. You look at history, Karl Marx, all the other Reshaim, they're all Jews. Wicked, but nonetheless Jews. They destroyed Russia, and he wrote in chapter 2 of Mein Kampf, they destroyed Russia, now they're destroying Germany, that's why I have to destroy them. Now, this doesn't make he's right, the point is that's actually real true history. Now, he saw that the Jews are controlling the financial system and they're charging such high...
Communism has been a big deal in this region of Russia and Ukraine for over 100 years now. However, to understand where communism came from, you need to understand the history of the pogroms in the Pale of Settlements region, which began in 1772. The pogroms were violent attacks by white Russians against the Jewish Russians living in the Pale of Settlement region for over a century. And when you look at the committees who started the communist revolutions in Russia in 1905 and 1917, you see the leaders are Ashkenazi Jews, the victims of the pogroms.
Red Army units and the secret police agencies set up by Lenin, known as the Cheka, had no compunction about using the most ruthless methods to deal with monarchists and other anti-communists. In telegrams to his militants, Lenin ordered that all those who opposed the communist regime should be shot. The Bolsheviks arrested tens of thousands of people for the crime of opposing the regime. Most of these were tortured and executed en masse. The famous Russian writer Maxim Gorky described examples of Bolshevik savagery. In Tambov province, communists were nailed with railway spikes by their left hand and left foot to trees a meter above the soil. And they watched the torments of these deliberately, oddly crucified people. They would open a prisoner's belly, take out the small intestine, and nailing it to a tree or telegraph pole, they drove the man around the tree with blows, watching the intestine unwinding through the wound. Stripping a captured officer naked, they tore strips of skin from his shoulders in the form of shoulder straps. A terrible fear fell over Russia, but the communist savagery had only just begun.
And so the overthrow of the Russian people and the Ukrainian people by these revolutionaries was carried out by the Khazarian mafia, who were made up mainly of atheists who were Freemasons of the Oriental variety. And so the Oriental Freemasons were the ones behind communism. And they were in it for themselves, not for the poor working classes that they used to have the uprising in St. Petersburg. And they managed to squash all the poor people in Russia under their iron fist.
When the Bolsheviks came to power, most of the population of Russia lived in the villages, enjoying a pretty miserable standard of living. Most peasants were only just able to feed their families with what they produced. The freezing Russian winters made productive agriculture an impossibility. A decision taken by Lenin in 1918 inflicted an even worse disaster on millions of peasants who were already living in poverty. Private property was forbidden, and the peasants' goods were to be confiscated by the state. Lenin carried out that policy by means of another right-hand man, Felix Dzerzhinsky, the head of the Cheka, well known for his ruthlessness. Cheka officers descended on villages all over Russia and began rounding up peasants' crops and livestock at gunpoint. A quota to be handed over by every peasant and given to the Bolsheviks was drawn up. In order to meet that quota, most of them had to give up all that they possessed. Peasants who protested were silenced by the most savage means. On 14 February 1922, one inspector who visited the Omsk region wrote, "Abuses of position by the requisitioning detachments, frankly speaking, have now reached unbelievable levels. Systematically, the peasants who are arrested are all locked up in big, unheated barns. They are then whipped and threatened with execution. Those who have not filled the whole of their quota are bound and forced to run naked all along the main street of the village and then locked up in another unheated hangar. Lenin was enraged when he realized that the quota set for the villages would not be met. In 1920, he inflicted a fearful punishment on some regions that had resisted the requisitions. Not only would these peasants' crops be seized, but also all the seeds they possessed. Confiscating the seeds meant that the peasants would be unable to produce a new crop. In other words, they would have nothing to eat. Then the famine began. 29 million people within the borders of Russia battled with starvation. In 1921 and 1922, 5 million starved agonizingly to death. Lenin watched what was happening with enormous pleasure. In his view, the famine was most useful. He calculated that it would help to destroy people's belief in God and religion and make them bow their heads to communism. In the Black Book of Communism that sent shockwaves around the world, that devilish idea of Lenin's is discussed thus. As one of his friends later recalled, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov had the courage to come out and say openly that famine would have numerous positive results. Famine, he explained, would bring about the next stage more rapidly and usher in socialism, the stage that necessarily followed capitalism. Famine would also destroy faith not only in the Tsar, but in God too. This is what Lenin wrote to the members of the Politburo on March 19, 1922. The present moment favors us. With the help of all those starving people who are starting to eat each other, who are dying by the millions, and whose bodies litter the roadside all over the country, it is now and only now that we can and therefore must confiscate all church property with all the ruthless energy we can muster. Our only hope is the despair engendered in the masses by the famine, which will cause them to look at us in a favorable light, or, at the very least, with indifference. These communications in the Soviet archives have revealed that Lenin deliberately brought about that dreadful famine which cost 5 million lives. That is the same conclusion arrived at by the historian Richard Pipes, who spent years researching the archives in his book, The Unknown Lenin. In his view, for humankind at large, Lenin had nothing but scorn. Individual human beings held for Lenin almost no interest, and he treated the working class much as a metal worker treated iron ore.
And so historians say that the pogroms cost 100,000 lives, that is 100,000 Jewish lives, there in the Pale of Settlements region over a period of about 3 centuries. And from 1917 we know that the numbers of retribution against the Russian people by the Jews cost millions of lives. This eye for an eye, tooth for tooth attitude that they have meant that they murdered millions and millions of Russians and later Ukrainians. And this is because they have the attitude that non-Jews are the goy being people who are not the chosen people, and they are like animals in their eyes, and so they treat them like animals.
Not only did Lenin regard human beings as a species of animal, he also employed animal methods to train them. In October 1919, he paid a personal visit to the Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov, famous for his conditioned reflex experiments on animals. Lenin wanted to impose these conditioned reflex methods on the whole of Russian society. Pavlov was astounded. "I want the masses of Russia to follow a communistic pattern of thinking and reacting," Lenin explained. Pavlov was astounded. It seemed that Lenin wanted him to do for humans what he had already done for dogs. "Do you mean that you would like to standardize the population of Russia? Make them all behave in the same way?" he asked. "Exactly," replied Lenin. "Man can be corrected. Man can be made what we want him to be." From 1922 on, an increasingly serious sickness slowly began to paralyze him. He spent most of 1923 in a wheelchair, suffering from terrible headaches. In March 1923, he had a stroke and was thenceforth unable to speak normally. In the final months of his life, those who saw Lenin were terrified. His face had taken on a peculiar expression, and he was half mad. The final photograph taken of him shortly before his death was utterly ghastly. Lenin died on January 21, 1924. The Bolsheviks organized a huge funeral ceremony for Lenin. The leaders of the Communist Party decided to have his body, which had a tremendous importance for them, embalmed. Among those bearing Lenin's coffin was the next dictator of Soviet Russia, Joseph Stalin.
In Moscow, Red China's Foreign Minister Chow En-lai signs a 30-year treaty with Soviet Russia as dictator Joseph Stalin looks impassively on. The treaty, the result of 2-month secret negotiation, binds each to aid the other if attacked. Russia's Molotov sees Foreign Minister Vyshinsky sign. Red China's boss, Mao Zedong, isn't saying what China gave Russia in return for such treaty aid as a $300 million Russian loan.
The great Chinese chairman Mao Zedong once declared the death of 300 million of his own people would be a price worth paying.
He was basically saying, I can lose half of my people to get what I want. I'm ready to take that risk. That's a brutal, callous way of thinking.
Ultimately, his heartless political regime oversees the slaughter of millions.
Violence works, and it works through power. He was convinced that politics had to be violent.
This is the story of a sadistic autocrat addicted to brutality. From his communist roots, through his reign of cruelty and revenge.
Mao was in the league of Hitler and Stalin.
At 189 Jiefeng North Road in Heping District, Tianjin, stands a small European-styled office block hiding a unique story from China's modern history. In 1886, this now renovated building was once the Tianjin Printing House, home to newspapers such as Peking and Tianjin Times over a century ago. It was there in 1931 that a young 15-year-old Jewish boy from Poland laying the foundations for a successful career in journalism. In the coming years, he would go on to live a remarkable life as a journalist and author, and becoming one of the first naturalized Chinese citizens to become a member of the Communist Party of China. His name was Israel Epstein, or Epi to his friends, and this is his story.
And so how did these evil communist regimes come into power in the 20th century? And the answer to that question is through the Jewish international bankers, who were mainly from Germany, London and New York. And here we see Jacob Schiff, who was a leading partner in the international Jewish banking firm in Wall Street called Kuhn Loeb, who boasted on his deathbed that he provided $20 million towards the success of the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. And then in 1949 we know that a key Jewish man was a man called Israel Epstein, and here he is in the photograph with Mao Zedong, second from the right on the bottom row, and he's surrounded by Jews there. And also another high-level meeting with Mao is also him being surrounded by Jews, and attending that meeting was Frank Coe, Israel Epstein, Elsie Fairfax Cholmondeley, and Solomon Adler. And we also know that another prominent member of the Politburo was the propaganda minister, who was a man called Sidney Shapiro, who was an American Jew. And we see both Sidney Shapiro and also Israel Epstein at Israel Epstein's 90th birthday being held at the Jingfeng Hotel there in Beijing. And also you see another photograph here of Israel Epstein with Chairman Hu Jintao. And so we know that the Jews were involved in establishing the revolutions during the 20th century. And also we see also that David Rockefeller is an enthusiastic supporter of China.
We were young, vigorous boys, and 4 years had passed since our last sexual encounter. That's why we caught any German woman who crossed our path. Sometimes 10 Soviets would rape the same girl. There weren't enough women for all of us, and besides, soon the rumor of what we were doing spread, causing people to flee. We had to settle for 12 and 13-year-old girls. When they cried, we covered their mouths with a cloth, something that seemed amusing to us. Now that the years have passed, I don't understand how I was able to do this, I who had been raised by a respectable family. The terrible words you just heard belong to a former soldier of the Soviet Union. In 1945, the Red Army swept through the city of Berlin, drowning it in a wave of death and destruction that left tens of thousands dead. The crimes of the Stalinist troops were forgotten, as historians focused for decades on the abominable crimes of Nazism and the crucial Soviet victory that ultimately destroyed the Third Reich. However, starting in 1991, with the dissolution of the communist state, declassified documents have revealed shocking information about the actions of the Soviets in the German capital. The testimonies are chilling. Looting, mass rapes, summary executions, desperate soldiers seeking revenge, and officers turning a blind eye to the suffering of German civilians.
Эти повозки, фургоны, машины в кювет. И пока они сбрасывают, солдаты срываются со своих мест и начинают насиловать женщин, немок. И вот мой взвод собственный, все мои солдаты бросаются и насилуют немок. Когда на спасение дети, матерей пытаются спасти, их застреливают, их расстреливают детей. Значит, теперь на дороге стоят генералы, наблюдают это, полковники. Ну, временные, дальше ехать нельзя, была загромождена дорога. Вышли. И телефонистки мои все смеются. Реакция, они матерщиницы все были. Телефонистки. Да.
The testimony we saw earlier is certainly chilling. There is nothing more terrible than hearing it from the mouth of one of the victims. Now we will listen to Lisa Slater, an administrative employee of the Wehrmacht who was sheltered with others in a basement. One day, they were intercepted by the Soviets, who made them experience hell.
From then on, we lived in the basement, in a garden basement. Yes.
The basement of whose house?
My aunt, across from her was Kreuzberg. A beautiful kind of, it was a park. And the caretaker had a huge home there with garden places. And so we moved in there. And that's when I saw my first Russian soldier, we all. The little Mongolian, even we had May with their fur caps down, okay? And then they came downstairs to the basement, putting this cardboard on the table, telling the people in Berlin, Väterchen Stalin gave his troops the right to rape, to steal, to kill, to do whatever they want to do. And believe me, they did. They came every night into our basement, to all the basements. They just took their boots, and we were all bedded down. All the men in the front, the woman in the back. By then I was in my 9 months pregnancy, also close to having my child. And they kicked with the boot, Frau komm. That's the only German word maybe they knew, Frau komm. And then the person had to get up, the woman, and they didn't take her outside the basement. They put her against the wall, and they stood in line with their machine gun pointing at us and raped the woman. And they were not 18 years or 19 or nobody looked good. I mean, you didn't want to look good. There was a lady, she was in her 60s, and I thought that was old at that time. She had a husband in the basement with her, And I don't know why. That poor woman was almost taken every night. And one night her husband was just so frustrated, he got up and thrust forward and kept saying, no, no, please, no. And what they did, they turned around, shot him, raped her, and after they finished raping her, shot her. And we were not allowed to take these bodies out of the basement for the whole night. We had to leave the bodies in the basement. And then the next day, some official came down and then we were taken out. And then our old man told us when they took the bodies out, there were a heap of bodies and that thing. That went on in Berlin with the loudspeaker playing Tchaikovsky music on every corner, beautiful music, and in between they tell us, people in Berlin, we make a second Moscow out of you, and the war is over, you will be glorious Russia, and this. And we had women and young children, our young teenagers, jumping literally off bridges, of everything, just to kill themselves because they didn't want to be raped. And this is what I don't think ever in my life will forget. My mother, it isn't just that it happened to us or to me. I was so far advanced with my pregnancy. The humiliation that I was even pushed against the wall, even though he was drunk as anyway. They couldn't do anything with me. And I had the gall, I spat at him. But I'm so little and they were so tall, he didn't even know it. But my sister had already her 6-month-old child, so she took the safety needle from that dirty diaper what she had on and started poking her daughter in her little behind, so she would scream and scream and scream. And that maybe saved me, that they finally decided to leave and scan out of there. These are things what maybe are not said.
After their passage through the city of Berlin, they left a trail of blood in their wake and ruined the lives of thousands of innocent people. Among them were women who were savagely raped and, in the following years, had to deal with the psychological consequences of trauma. Many became pregnant after the assaults and were marginalized by the Germans themselves, who saw them as collaborators of the communist troops.
The women of Berlin were being treated as spoils of war, who the soldiers took their anger out and rage on. Many women were forced to try and become friendly with one Soviet soldier so they would protect them from other members of the Red Army. For example, Magda Wiedeland, a 24-year-old actress, was dragged from a cupboard where she hid, and a soldier from Central Asia found her. She offered to be his girlfriend if he would protect her from other Russians, but instead he boasted to his friends, then they assaulted her en masse. Many women had to disappear during what they deemed was the hunting hours, where the Soviets would look for any women. They saw the safer hours as the early morning, when they were hungover and sleeping, and many mothers gave themselves up to save their daughters. Many women who live in Berlin today can still recall the horror and the screams of those nights, and as many of the windows had been blown up through the artillery, everything could be heard. The city's hospitals had to deal with many victims of the Red Army, and one doctor believed that around 100,000 women had been assaulted in Berlin, but 10,000 women had died from their ordeals, or the fact they took their lives after the horror they were subjected to. It's believed that 2 million women at least were assaulted by Red Army soldiers across Germany. Men who tried to defend women against Soviet attackers were shot dead and were killed and executed in brutal ways. Following the fall of the city, onlookers noted that out of desperation and for food, many of Berlin's women sold themselves for food and other luxuries such as cigarettes, which were being used inside the city as currency. One woman
The most harrowing aspect of the Red Army's occupation of Berlin was the widespread sexual violence perpetrated against German women. Estimates suggest that up to 2 million German women were sexually assaulted by Soviet soldiers during this period. In Berlin alone, it is believed that around 100,000 women were assaulted, with many of them subjected to repeated offences. Some women were assaulted as many as 60 to 70 times, illustrating the extreme brutality of these acts.
That's how the history of the ethnic German cleansing has been dealt with.
The survivors' stories will pay homage to the 15 million people who felt it, lived it, and the many who died from it.
The forgotten genocide will now be remembered.
Then the air raid siren wails again to remind them that they lost a war of their own making. To remind them that it is up to them to regain their self-respect as a nation and to learn to live in a friendly manner with their neighbors. To remind them that much as we hate it, we shall stay in Germany until we have real guarantees that the next generation will grow up a sane and Christian people. A Germany of light and life and freedom. A Germany that respects truth and tolerance and justice.
The Nazis killed 12 million people in World War II. 6 million were killed in
You said 12?
6 million were killed in the Holocaust. Or do you not believe that either?
Okay. I mean, Jews have killed far more Christians. Well, Jews have killed far more. Let's just accept the 6 million figure. Jews have killed far more Christians than that. I mean, it's not even close. If you look at the Bolshevik genocide, you look at the Holodomor, I mean, they've killed way more Christians. I mean, they basically invented the genocide. So, you know, they deny the Armenian genocide. Israel denies that. They've lobbied the U.S. to deny that. I'm Armenian. They killed half of my people. So, you know, and I'm not offended by that. You know, if somebody questions that, it's not some crazy thing. I mean, Israel denies the Armenian Holocaust. Okay.
It sounds to me, Dan, like you do actually hate Jewish people.
The moment Piers Morgan asked that pointed question, the room seemed to hold its breath. Piers leaned forward, clearly anticipating something incendiary or headline-worthy. Dan Bilzerian, on the other hand, didn't rush to answer. He paused, almost theatrically, as if weighing the gravity of what he was about to say. The tension in the air was palpable, and the silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Finally, Dan broke it with a response that was both thought-provoking and controversial.
No, I believe that Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat to the world today. I look at what they're doing in the media. They're pushing this transgender nonsense. I mean, and they did it in Germany. The first transgender clinic was opened by a Jewish guy. And I don't like this perversion pushed on our children. I don't like the fact that 9-year-olds are reading about homosexual acts. I don't like that drag queens are reading them in schools. I don't like that Kamala Harris wants to pay for sex changes in prison so that men can turn into women and women can turn into men. And I don't like the fact that he's putting in, you know, men into women's prisons, male rapists into women's prisons because they identify as women. I mean, it's just nonsense. I don't like, you know, men beating up women in boxing and sports. I think it's all nonsense. And I think it's leading to a degradation of moral fiber. And if left unchecked, I think it's going to ruin the world.
But again, you're blaming Jewish people. Why?
Questions like that are always a double-edged sword. On one hand, they demand honesty, and on the other, they require careful navigation to avoid pitfalls like overgeneralization or appearing judgmental. Dan Bilzerian's answer was nuanced, albeit controversial. He addressed a sentiment that many share but are often hesitant to express, a disdain for what he perceives as the unchecked dominance of certain groups. However, he made a clear distinction, stating that he harbored no hatred for Jewish people as individuals, but took issue with what he described as the supremacist tendencies of some within their ranks.
I've seen a lot of news about how local Europeans are mad that tourists are just ruining their cities and they're complaining and they're squirting the water. You guys just have to accept at this point that you're our Disney World now. That's your function in this world. All your economies have stagnated. You don't produce anything besides the prostitution of your own history and cured meats. That's what you have to offer the global economy. Just riding off of the fumes of the luxury goods and culture you created centuries ago, and that's really all you have. China is making solar panels and you make manchego. What do you think is going to happen here? Look on the bright side. Okay, you had your fun, you know, colonizing the world, pillaging and extracting wealth to make your nice little piazzas and palaces. And so now you have to accept that you're just museum cities. You're a museum as a city, and all the natives are little mannequins that we can look at and poke. And they say, oh, would you like mustard with that? You know, that's it, you're animatrons. And so when the tourists come to your country, you should say, thank you, merci, thank you so much for coming and visiting our poor little playground, because that's what you are, you're our playground. And if you also want to have your nice little pensions and your health care while taking off 9 months a year and retiring at 42, then you should just accept that you're a living, breathing, it's a small world ride. Like, that's what you are, and that's the trade-off. That you get to retire at 12 years old, and you're not a real country.
This is the Jews, this is the Nazis. It's all prophecy here. You only have one blessing. Yitzchak said, I made him your master. Whatever I will give you will be his. Better for you, you don't get a lot. Anyway, it will belong to him. Everywhere you go in the world, who's running all the financial? Always the Jews. Started in Paro, Yosef, everyone. Science, financial, politics, behind the presidents. Even now, everybody knows that all the campaign of Donald Trump is his son-in-law, the Jew, Kushner. I read it 3 different articles. He is the mastermind behind everything. He told him what to say, what not to say, how to react, things that he did in the end, that in the end worked out for him.
He was asking you why you haven't tweeted out about enough about the Israel October 7th Hamas attack, right? And so whenever someone confronts us here at the show about, they go, oh, you support Hamas, I say, I don't support Hamas. You know who does support Hamas? Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government, who have been giving them suitcases full of cash for the last 15 to 20 years, at least. So why would they be doing that? We all know why.
It's just funny because this is how the media actually behaves. You say something sensible, and then it's just, well, you hate black people. Well, you hate Jews.
Just because you worship the best Jew who ever lived.
So let me ask you two questions there about that. Tell me what is Yagoda, and what happened with the Bolsheviks and the Christians?
Oh, you just casually killed 10 million Christians. It's incredible. People think that the greatest mass murderer was Adolf Hitler. And no, actually, if you want to talk about genocide, the fact that people in America don't know about what the Bolsheviks did to Christians, where did the idea of a concentration camp come from? The Bolsheviks. The reason why we're not allowed to learn about these people, we don't talk about Henry Yagoda, is because he's a Jew, right? And so it conflicts with the narrative of Jewish people always being the victim in every single circumstance. So we're willing to push away Christian history. We don't talk about Christian history whatsoever because they have this bizarre focus, our classrooms, on training us to have this bizarre allegiance to Israel. And so to suit us, I feel that we are heavily propagandized in the classroom. But the fact that I'm denied the right to talk about my history while you demand I talk about yours and you demand that I worship Israel doesn't fly with me.
Was wir unter Idee und Weltanschauung im Allgemeinen zu verstehen pflegen, hat mit dem, was man Bolschewismus nennt, gar nichts zu tun. Es handelt sich bei ihm einen pathologischen, verbrecherischen Wahnsinn, nachweisbar von Juden erdacht und von Juden geführt, mit dem Ziel der Vernichtung der europäischen Kulturvölker und der Aufrichtung einer internationalen jüdischen Weltherrschaft über sie. Die Einzelheiten, wie über die Ermordung von Priestern und Schändung von Nonnen an uns gelangen, sind ganz unvorstellbar und deshalb auch gar nicht wiederzugeben.
Denn diese Gelbungsstaatsmänner fliegen still, als in Russland Hunderttausende am Semester oder verbrannt worden waren. Sie fliegen still, als in Spanien Zehntausende von Priestern und Nonnen in vielster Weise abgeschlachtet oder bei lebendem Leib dem Feuer übergeben wurden. Sie konnten und können diese Tatsachen nicht bestreiten. Aber sie fliegen und schweigen.
Han i sanne gått i forbund med djevelen. Han gått i forbund med bolsjevismen. Med bolsjevismen, hvis målet å utrydde og ødelegge all europeisk kultur. Ødelegge alt det som vi setter pris på i livet. Alt det som for oss er hellig. Hjem, familie, ektefeller, barn, moral, kristendom. Alt det vil bolsjevismen ødelegge. Og med det går de i forbund. Med det slutter Churchill forbund for å ødelegge nasjonale reisninger i Europa, ødelegge det nasjonale Norge.
England kjemper ikke engang for England. Englands ledende menn lar jo England gå til grunne. England kjemper kun for den internasjonale klikk, for plutokratene, jødene, for frimurerne.
Und das Gebet dieses Teufelspriesters, der wünscht, dass Europa vom Bolschewismus, das wird nicht in Erfüllung gehen, sondern das Gebet wird in Erfüllung gehen. Herrgott, gib uns die Kraft, dass wir uns die Freiheit erhalten, unserem Volk und den Kindern und unseren, nicht nur uns Deutschen, sondern auch den anderen Völkern Europas. Denn es ist nicht ein Krieg, wenn wir alle dieses Mal führen, für unser deutsches Volk allein. Es ist ein Krieg für ganz Europa und damit wirklich für die ganze Menschheit.
Der Völkerstreit oder Hass untereinander, er wird gepflegt von ganz bestimmten Interessenten. Es ist eine kleine, wurzellose, internationale Clique, die die Völker gegeneinander hetzt, die nicht will, dass sie zur Ruhe kommen. Es sind das die Menschen, die überall und nirgends zu Hause sind, die nirgends einen Boden haben, auf dem sie gewachsen sind, sondern die heute in Berlin leben, morgen genauso gut in Brüssel sein können, übermorgen in Paris und dann wieder in Prag oder in Wien oder in London und die sich überall zu Hause fühlen. Es sind die einzigen, die wirklich als internationale Elemente anzusprechen sind, weil sie überall ihre Geschäfte betätigen können.
I Russland har bolsjevikene tatt jorden fra bøndene og jaget millioner etter millioner av dem i døden. Bare i 1932-33 kunstet Stalin bevisst 6 millioner bønder til døde. De saboterende prester lukker øynene på bolsjevismens grufulle kjensgjerning, mens de er opptatt med et påstått nasjonalsosialistisk egenskap. Nasjonalsosialismen, som dog har reddet, liksom den opprettholder og understøtter de kristne kirker i Tyskland. Og nå er i ferd med å gjenreise kirkene i Russland, hvor bolsjevikken har rasert både kirkens hus og likvidert dens tjenere. Dere får alle lese opp falske hyrdebrev. Pressen i dag, hvis de er virkelig kristne og kjenner sin tid og sin hellige plikt, de i kirkene, om at Gud vil redde Norges folk fra bolsjevismens raseri. De burde mane folket til samhold og vakthold mot den gudløse bolsjevismen som åpner sitt fresende gap mot Europa og Norden.
Since they first appeared in the 18th century, Freemasons have provoked speculation and aroused fantasy in Europe and across the globe. With their enigmatic symbols, secret rituals, and supposed influence in the political and economic world, no other organization has generated as much fascination and hostility.
They say that Freemasonry is secretive, but no, it's discreet.
With World War II, this hostility came to a head. Convinced that the Freemasons held political and esoteric secrets, the Nazis launched mass robberies of European Masonic lodges in occupied countries.
Were there esoteric documents in these archives? Yes.
To have possession of the secret archives of the Freemasons was to fight from within to destroy their influence.
It's the largest collection of Masonic archives that's ever been brought together in the world.
From the very beginning of Nazi occupation, the French lodges were occupied by German military police.
Dieser Logentempel wurde von unseren Truppen in Paris entdeckt. Die internationalen Freimaurer umgaben sich auch hier mit kindischer Symbolik und albernem Prunk. Hinter dieser Tarnung verbargen sie jene großen politischen und wirtschaftlichen Transaktionen, die einer kleinen Clique von Plutokraten, Finanz- und Waffenschiebern riesige Gewinne verschafften, ganze Völker aber dem Elend preisgaben.
Lavrenti Beria, nicknamed the Russian Himmler, the man behind the torture and deportations of any and all who challenged communism.
So it was about a week later that I was given permission to go back in the stacks and see more of these files. I found a top secret folder about the seizure by Smersh, the Soviet counter-espionage group. Beria had sent instructions for a special team to go to a small village in the Sudetenland. This was in May 1945. They brought 28 freight car train wagons, sealed, of course, of French archives.
The countries that had fallen victim to the Nazis were shaken to the core by these findings, as they discovered that whole sections of their collective memory had landed in the hands of the Russians. The Freemasons were alerted.
As soon as I had confirmation that Masonic archives existed somewhere in Moscow, I organized a special group. They discovered that there were roughly 28,000 files. The boxes were numbered and well organized, as you can imagine would be the case of the Soviet administration of the time.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And something I wanted to point out to you, you know, there are many pictures about the Russian liberating Auschwitz, and there's never any snow. And the snow was honestly that high. And so I have some connection with the Russian embassy, and I was there once, and I said, something puzzles me. Those photos are fakes, because there's no snow. And they said, well, yes, they are not fakes, but when the army came, they didn't have cameras, they didn't photograph. So only much later, when they realized we should have pictures of it, they took pictures like you see now, but this is definitely not in Auschwitz and not the liberation of Auschwitz. There were not that many people with clothes and children, and no snow.
Right, fascinating.
So I think historically we should point this out.
And get it right, yeah.
To get it right.
أغلبنا لا يعرف بأن صعود النازية بين الحرب العالمية الأولى والثانية هو كان بدعم أمريكي. الكل يتساءل طيب كيف كان هناك يعني انهيار ألماني وقيود أوروبية، كيف سمحوا للنازية بالصعود وتأسيس جيش بالدعم الأمريكي، بالأموال الأمريكية، بالقروض، بالاستثمار.
Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to hear it in your pod. You'll owe nothing and be happy. Ain't got no cash, ain't got no car, but 24 booster shots in your arm. Owe nothing. Be happy. You can't even buy shit in the store because of your low social credit score. Owe nothing. Be happy. You'll owe nothing and be happy. Be happy and eat the bugs.
6 ملايين، لا يوجد أي دليل بأن هناك 6 ملايين يهودي قتلوا، وربما حصلت محارق لا أحد ينفيها، وهناك معسكرات اعتقال صحيح، ولكن الدليل على أن هذا الموضوع مسيس وليس إنساني ولا حقيقي. كيف نتحدث عن 6 ملايين ولا نتحدث عن 26 مليون سوفيتي قتلوا في تلك الحرب؟ يعني 6 ملايين أغلى. الممارسات نفسها كانت على كل الاتجاهات، لم يكن هناك طرق قتل مختصة باليهود ولا طريقة تعذيب مختصة باليهود. في كل الأماكن نفس الطريقة استخدمتها النازية، ولكن القضية هي قضية مسيسة ولتزوير الحقيقة ولاحقا للتمهيد لنقل اليهود من أوروبا باتجاه مناطق أخرى هي فلسطين. اليهود الذين أتوا إلى فلسطين هم يهود الخزر شرق قزوين، هم وثنيون و تبعوا الديانة اليهودية في القرن الثامن الميلادي، هاجروا إلى أوروبا وأتوا إلى هذه المنطقة. لا يوجد أي علاقة بينهم وبين شعب إسرائيل.
Now he knows China's still running their country the way they want to, but they're neighbors. So he's like, let me work with them. They're entitled to run the country however they want to. There's not as much brutal killing as they've seen in previous times, but I feel Russia in itself has tried to embrace democracy at different points in time, and they've been rejected. Even in 1991, which we covered regarding Russian Ukraine, that Russia tried to decide to ask to join NATO, and they got rejected.
History tells us that Berthier, the French general, entered Rome and took the Pope captive, and by decree of Napoleon declared that the Papal States had been dissolved and that a secular government was put in its place. So secularism overran or pushed him out of his position. And then secularism must rule for a while, and then the reverse will take place, and the king of the north will overrun the south, and eventually the synthesis will take place, and the south will be at his heels, and they will vent their fury on the Holy Covenant collectively. But we also saw that both parties are really controlled by the dragon power, and therefore both parties were actually also consulting each other, and much must have been happening behind closed doors as they discuss how to bring people to decide against the Holy Covenant. In 1798, Berthier made his entrance into Rome, abolished the papal government, and established a secular one, Encyclopedia Americana. So secularism, humanism, all of those isms which exclude God out of their political arenas take over. Now I'm fascinated by history. The one who actually did this was Napoleon. And just by a little quirk of, shall we say, divine intervention, he actually was also the literal king of the south, because he had conquered Egypt. He had entered into Egypt. And I'm fascinated to see that Freemasonry has something interesting to say about this, and so that we make sure we use the right sources, we use them. Freemasonry's web pages itself, the Grand Lodge of the British Columbia and Yukon, and they claim over here the evidence in favor of a Masonic initiation previous to Napoleon's assumption of the imperial title is overwhelming. The initiation took place in the body of an army Philadelphia lodge of the Ecosias, primitive rite of Narbonne, the third initiation of École Communique, being an advancement in the rate. These initiations took place between 1795 and 1798. This is fascinating stuff. So in the years prior to this push, secret societies were being formed and gathered into their ranks, those that would play the major parts in the final events. Because the battle is for your mind. And what they can achieve in secret can have an impact on the whole of humanity. So what happened once these secret societies had been formed, and who formed them? We will have to look into that. And we will see, and even in all the previous lectures that we have done on these topics, we have seen that organizations such as the Jesuits and others were deeply involved in the formation of secret societies and actually controlled them behind the scenes. So in actual fact, these kings, the king of the north and the king of the south, were sitting at the table behind the scenes. Now, Napoleon and Freemasonry, they say it was never, there's no absolute proof, but they claim that obviously he was. And what did he do? Always by their fruits you must judge them. August 15, 1769, this comes from the Freemasonry webpage as well. Napoleon Bonaparte in Corsica, trained in the military schools in Paris, was promoted to general after the siege of Toulon. He led the troops into most of Europe. And in 1798, Egypt. Isn't that beautiful? Returning to France, he was nominated first consul after the revolution of the 18th Brumaire. Napoleon founded the Bank of France. Now, I want you to take note of what is happening here. We're getting an entirely new political system in the world. One that moves the emphasis from the religious sphere to the secular sphere. And in the culminating years afterwards, secularism seems to rule and seems to have pushed the religious out of the way. And behind the scenes, things are happening. New structures are set in place. New organizations, new forms of government. And eventually the tables are reversed, and the King of the North overruns these mindsets because they have induced in the minds of men a longing for something higher. Very fascinating possibility. He founded the Bank of France, reformed the tax system, restored the church, no more dominance of one group of churches over another, improved the education system, and in 1804 assumed the hereditary title of Emperor of the French. The following year, he was at war with Russia, Austria, and England. In April 1814, he was forced to abdicate and exiled to Elba. He attempted to regain his empire in 1815, was defeated at Waterloo, and banished to St. Helena, and died 6 years later. Now, here are some of his fruits. Napoleon appointed his brothers to Masonic office. This is their webpage, it's not conjecture. This is not a conspiracy. This is fact. Louis was named Deputy Grand Master in 1805. Jerome was Grand Master of the Grand Orient, Westphalia, the eldest. Joseph was made a Freemason at the Tuileries in April 1805 and appointed Grand Master of the Grand Orient of France. And Lucien was a member of the Grand Orient of France. And these were the ruling people of Europe. Now, if we go to the history books and we look at the International Napoleonic Society, we find something else that's very interesting. Napoleon and the Jews. Napoleon was the first leader in Europe to grant liberty, equality, and fraternity. And those same watchwords became the watchwords for another nation that would receive a gift from France, namely the Statue of Liberty, and would introduce those same systems of thinking and governance into its midst. And he gave this to all religions. And this lithograph here represents Napoleon granting liberty to the Jews. Napoleon's uncle, Cardinal Fesch, also got involved. He told Napoleon, "Sire, so you wish the end of the world to come with your laws to give the Jews equality like the Catholics? Do you not know that the Holy Scriptures predict that the end of the world will happen when the Jews will be recognized as a corporate nation?" Fascinating stuff. You see, up until that time, Protestantism had filled the world with the mindset that the papacy was the Antichrist. And now suddenly the Antichrist as a political entity disappears from the world scene, and his power, his political power, is removed from their sight. Where is he now? Isn't he going to bring about the final events? He dives underground. He doesn't disappear as a church, he remains a woman. But secret societies spring up everywhere. And these secret societies are founded by the very people that now have disappeared. And then they forbid people like Roman Catholics from joining some of the societies, like Freemasonry. And then when the objectives have been achieved, they unban the societies, as happened under John Paul II. This is interesting stuff, but here's a new worldview coming along. A new worldview. You see, the Jesuits had taught that the Antichrist was yet future, and that he would arise, and that he would intimidate the Jews, the church not being there anymore, but having been raptured. And all eyes, therefore, should await the coming of a Jewish kingdom so that the promised Antichrist could come. Now, the one who actually started this philosophy is Napoleon. At the time of the end, this philosophy, this secularization of the world, will push the king of the north out of the way. And then behind the scenes, things can happen, while to the minds of the people, they see something totally different. For religion, Napoleon ended the schism and restored the Catholic Church to France by the Concordat of 1801. So the Catholics couldn't have been that powerful. They were removed from power. Where's the Antichrist? He ensured freedom of religion and equality to the Protestant sects, and he declared France the homeland of the Jews. After it became obvious he could not establish their national home in Palestine, the code Napoleon established, equality before the law, emphasized the sanctity of the family and assured the legal gains of the revolution. The Code of Civil Procedures ensured widespread use of mediation in the courts and laws, and the courts were secularized. We move from religious dominance to secular dominance. Napoleon's religious opinions were the height of modern philosophy. This is what the Napoleonic Society writes. He was completely given to tolerance. Everywhere that Napoleon went, he led tolerance by the hand. Everywhere that he found several religions, he ended the domination by which one took precedence over the other. This sounds marvelous. Faith, Napoleon would say, is beyond the reach of the law. It is the most personal possession of man, and no one has the right to demand an account for it. Doesn't that sound marvelous? And people had been sick and tired of religious fervor, religious intervention, religious suppression, religious laws, and here comes freedom. Now, what if eventually you can lead this freedom into chaos so that people can ask for the pendulum to swing the other way? And now most people don't actually know about this. They continue to say, now here's an amazing incident which is not generally known. When the French troops were in Palestine and besieging the city of Acre, Napoleon had already prepared a proclamation making Palestine an independent Jewish state. It didn't exist. They were going to establish it. He was unable to realize this project because of the intervention of the British. This proclamation was printed and dated the 20th of April, 1799, but his unsuccessful attempt to capture Acre prevented it from being issued. The Jews had to wait more than 150 years before their state was proclaimed. The proclamation, however, did bear fruit. It was a precursor to Zionism, heightening awareness of the cause of the Jewish statehood. The ideas Napoleon expressed found the admiration of many who saw Napoleon's gestures as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, which foretells of the restoration of the Jews to their land. The idea drew many adherents, especially in England. Here is a seed, a new philosophy being planted in the minds of men. There will be a Jewish state. The preparation for such a state must have been phenomenal. Just imagine. The Jewish people scattered throughout the entire world. Nothing but chaos here in the Middle East. And now a state is to be proclaimed. How are you going to achieve it that all the Jews that are ensconced in the various societies and normally quite affluent and good at what they are doing, how are you going to get them to budge and move there so that this can be fulfilled. That must take some effort. Not only that, if this happens, and eventually a temple can be built there, and a new philosophy, which is a Jesuit philosophy of the Antichrist who will come, Alcázar, Ribera, futuristic Jesuit philosophies, well, then you have a new Antichrist as well, and the world can look at political events unfolding, and the question of where you stand with God doesn't come close to you. It's something that happens on the world arena and doesn't affect you. Here's a totally new theology. And it comes when? What is the date? 1798. A new philosophy. Now, I just want to ask you, what does the world believe today? Do they believe what the reformers believed regarding the Antichrist? That it was the papacy? And that it would set itself up as a God in God's church, change times and laws, and make null and void the precepts of God? That's what they believed? Or is it going to be someone who will come in the future and attack a new state that had to be created? Well, this is what the world believes today. So this has been very successful. 118 years later, the British would issue the Balfour Declaration, which called for a Jewish homeland. And ultimately, 31 years later, in 1948, Israel would be recognized as a sovereign state by popular vote in the United Nations General Assembly. Perhaps it can be said that Napoleon's premature announcement on that first day of Passover in 1799 played an important role in the creation of the State of Israel. On the 16th of August, 1800, Napoleon declared, "If I governed a nation of Jews, I should re-establish the Temple of Solomon." This is fascinating. Revelation chapter 11. Now, I'm not going to deal with Revelation chapter 11 because we've done it already in a previous series, in the Total Onslaught series, where we spoke about secret societies and how they arose out of the turmoils of the French upheavals and finally the French Revolution. We're not going to repeat that. Napoleon and Islamic Masonry. This is very interesting. Freemasonry appeared in Egypt soon after Napoleon's conquest in 1798, when General Kleber, a French Mason and top commander in Napoleon's armies, established the Lodge of Isis. So secret societies are now being formed in these secularized nations that adopt the new philosophy. Nowhere more so than even in the United States of America. Washington was a Mason. All the great buildings that point to the seat of government lie on Masonic stones. This is history. This is not conjecture. French Masonry dominated Egypt until British lodges began to appear after the British occupation in 1882. So there are secret societies formed within these countries in Islamic Masonry. Freemasonry was very popular in the first half of the 20th century, and many important Egyptians were Masons, along with British rulers and aristocrats who occupied the country. In fact, the Egyptian monarchs from Khedive, Ismail to King Fahd were made honorary Grand Masters at the start of their reigns. So the Islamic world is actually ruled in this history by Masonic individuals. From 1940 to 1957, there were close to 70 Masonic lodges chartered throughout Egypt. At one time, the leaders of the nationalist and Wafd parties were Freemasons, and many members of the Egyptian parliament were Masons as well. where they mingled with the military commanders and the aristocrats of the ruling British occupation. So who's really ruling behind the scenes? Verse 7, Revelation 11, and when they have finished their testimony, this is the biblical word, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. So secularism will be instrumental in trying to make null and void God's word. And all the isms arise in this time period. Evolutionism, spiritism, they all arise then. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt. Spiritually, not literally, spiritually. So this is a mindset, a secular mindset. I ask you a question. Do we see it today in the world? What do we see? Do we see systems of government which are God-based, or do we see humanistic systems of government? When we look at our school systems, do we see God-centered education, or do we see evolutionism? Secularism is ruling the world. But secularism is leading to the collapse of morality. And once it gets to that point, then the king of the north philosophy will have the power to overrun it and grab the minds and hearts of the people while they are being duped and deceived into looking outside of themselves for the fulfillment of prophecies. Now, here are the temples. This is the first temple, what it looked like. And that's the model of the second temple, what it looked like. And are they preparing for the third temple? Yes, they certainly are. Here is the menorah, ready for the third temple. We have moved away from Protestantism and we have accepted Jesuitism. Now let's get back to the Napoleonic Society and see what happened further. Napoleon established both the Bank of France, we saw that, the French Bourse, the stock exchange, as well as the National Department of Tax Boards. Do we have all of those systems of governments in the world today, yes or no? Yes, we do. And we have the same system of economics today, yes or no? Yes. The world is run by the stock exchange. To ensure equitable taxation for all, consequently, the income of the French peasants skyrocketed. Think tanks and research centers were established in France to work on projects vital for national economy. So a totally new economic order evolved. Who started these organizations? We will have to see. Who runs the secret societies today and the secret organizations? Who started them? Who is the instigator? Who's the boss behind the scenes? We will have to see. And maybe we'll get a different picture of what's happening in the world. An industrial board was organized to provide data and information to French industry, as exemplified by the success of the sugar beet farming and the canning industry. In the military, Napoleon pioneered in what we describe today as the principles of war. And did you know that these principles, the armies of today, are based on the organization created by Napoleon for his Grand Army, and it has been used ever since. Who controls these armies? Who controls the war machines of the world? Who controls the gun running? These are important questions. And now it gets interesting. Napoleon disappears. He says, I want a Jewish state. I want to rebuild the Jewish temple. What is he planting in the minds? An idea. He starts the lodges. The British lodges start taking over these lodges eventually. Of course, they're all integrated. And then Prussia, when Napoleon is gone, retracted the liberal laws in 1815 after the Battle of Waterloo. The worst setback was inflicted upon the Jews of the Papal States. It would almost seem as if Pius VII had taken revenge on the Jewish population of his territory for the humiliation he had suffered at the hand of Napoleon. He was not content with their confinement behind the walls of the re-erected ghetto, but he obliged the Jews to wear the yellow badge. The Jews had to walk with a badge, with an armband. Does that ring a bell somewhere? In Sardinia, the Jews were thrown back into ghettos and not allowed to build synagogues. Much later, some European nations assimilated the Jews between 1824 and 1867, Holland in 1830. These are Protestant nations. They don't understand what's going on. They're trying to help the Jews. Sweden, 1834, Switzerland, 1838. It is remarkable that in England, it was only in 1858, after Lord Lionel Rothschild was elected 5 times, that he was permitted to take his seat in Parliament. It is also interesting to know that the laws that were passed in France in 1808 are still in existence even to this day. So there was liberty on the one hand, but oppression started to take over in Europe. And by the time we get to Adolf Hitler, did he introduce the same oppression, yes or no? Yes, he hounded them. He disenfranchised them. And the Russians, all of these nations, suddenly the world was in turmoil, in war, and the Jews were the hounded ones. And at the end of this war, where would those poor Jews go when they tried to escape the turmoil of Europe? Where did they go? They were herded like sheep to a new Jewish state in order to create a new philosophy which was to be swallowed hook, line, and sinker by a world with a totally new religious philosophy, no longer based on Protestantism, but now based on New Catholic counter-theology. Have you ever thought about it? That the British, who were the saviors of Europe, allowed ships to be filled with Jewish hopefuls who wanted to emigrate to the West, how they wouldn't let those ships pass by, and how eventually they were all herded towards Palestine, and the Jews had to settle in a land that had nothing. Well, it's interesting. You have to create a national identity. You have to create national heroes. And we dealt with that in previous lectures. I don't want to go into it. And eventually, where did they end up? They ended up the leaders of the nations. And a new nationality arose, and a new nationalistic, Zionistic pride arose, and a nation arose. I feel sorry for them. And this man was the lackey of his Pope. And I'm not going to deal with that. And this man was maybe the same lackey, sitting at the table, behind the scenes.
Buzzing, radars is buzzing. Yes, sir. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Now, if we look at dispensationalist teaching, let's have a look what they teach. Christians have an interest in Jerusalem and Israel. This is dispensationalism. This is what the world believes today. This is what the evangelical world preaches. This is what the Pentecostal world embraces. This is the power machine of modern prophetic Christian interpretation. It is as far removed from Protestantism as the East is from the West. It is a capitulation to Jesuitism. Perhaps one of the most significant signs they look for is the reconstruction of the Holy Temple on Mount Moriah, the third temple, and the reinstituting of Old Testament sacrifices. If I reinstitute the sacrifices, what am I saying? Am I not saying that Christ's sacrifice is null and void, that it didn't fulfill the type? Isn't he the Passover lamb? This would be followed prophetically by the appearance of the man of sin, the Antichrist, in the temple to shut it all down. And they all believe this today. This is not what the Bible taught. This is not what Protestantism taught. To call an end to prayers and sacrifices. This is called the abomination that makes desolate, or the abomination of desolation, Daniel 9:27. This is what they believe. This is a totally new theology. And in order to get people to believe this, you have to be prepared to dislocate millions of people and herd them to Palestine to create a nation that can fulfill the prophecy. But in order to do it, you must control all the powers that are role players in the game. Does that make sense? And that's where the secret societies come in, that were all set up during this time. Well, is this a reality? Are they really doing it? Yes, they are. You can look at the web pages. It's fascinating. The Third Temple, Gershon Salomon, chairman of the temple, Mount Faithful, the preeminent organization in Israel working for the rebuilding of the Third Temple, opined on the record saying that a Netanyahu government, do we have one now? We happen to have one. Would be good news for the prospect of the rebuilding of the temple. In previous political campaigns, Netanyahu incorporated into the platform of his Likud party that if he was elected prime minister, he would press for the opening of the Temple Mount for Jewish worship. And they claim that the Temple Mount faithful have the cornerstone ready to lay. In addition, the Temple Institute now has all the furniture and priestly garments ready for the Third Temple. The priesthood and the Sanhedrin have been revived. We're ready. And the world cannot wait for this event. And once this happened, Christians will be raptured. There's no such thing in the Bible. This is a new theology. This is a Roman Catholic conceived theology, and we'll be dealing with it in great detail in future lectures to show that it's not biblical, and yet the whole world believes it. Well, I was on the Temple Mount the other day, not so long ago, and there, of course, stands the Dome of the Rock. And today, there is great conjecture. As I walked there, we were speaking a wonderful language called Afrikaans. And these three gentlemen were so excited. They greeted us in that language. They came from South Africa. They were such nice people. They were so friendly. Look at them laughing. We sat down, we had a good chat to them and a good laugh. I have sympathy for the Muslim world. I have great sympathy for the Muslim world. And we'll be dealing with some of those issues, and some of the things we will be talking about are quite sensitive. And at the moment, they pointed me there to these trees on the Temple Mount that were dying. The tops were dying. And they said to me, these tops are dying because the Jews are excavating under the Temple Mount, and many of the water sources of these trees have been cut off. In fact, they fear that the very foundations of the Dome of the Rock are in jeopardy. Imagine if that building just one day disappears into some cavern underneath. What chaos will we have? But they claim they want to build the temple. Now, I want to discuss a little bit of sensitive history. And if I go to sensitive history, well, then I must quote sources that say it rather than that I say it. This is a fascinating book, and the web pages are there. You can check it out. Facts are Facts. This is a book that was written by a Jewish man. And he confronted the thinking of many of the high-placed individuals of the world. This is interesting stuff. In this book, Benjamin H. Friedman, a Jewish man, writes about the Jews and reveals an interesting history. He states that the present Jews in Palestine are not the true descendants of the Judeans, but rather descendants of the Khazars. In the letter addressed to D. David Goldstein of Boston, Massachusetts, a convert to Catholicism, the author, Benjamin Friedman of New York City, dated October 1954, provides some fascinating insights. This is in the public domain. Let's study this for a while and see where we get. Benjamin H. Friedman claims that the word Jew was only introduced into the English language in the 18th century, and that Jesus referred to himself as a Judean and not as a Jew. Inscribed upon the cross when Jesus was crucified were the Latin words Iesus Nazarenus Rex Iodeorum, which means Jesus of Nazareth, ruler of the Judeans. Now this is fascinating. I went and checked it, and it is so. Yes, it happens to be so. Now the word Jew today has a religious as well as a political connotation. You think of a Jewish entity, a government, but you also think of their religion incorporated at the same time, whereas the term Judean is a geographic connotation. It's a geographic. It doesn't incorporate the religion. It's where he came from. He was from Judah. He was a Judean. He further writes, the form of religious worship known as Pharisaism in Judea in the time of Jesus was a religious practice based exclusively upon the Talmud. The Talmud in the time of Jesus was the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all rolled into one, of those who practiced Pharisaism. The Talmud today occupies the same relative position with respect to those who profess Judaism. So the rituals and rites that many of them observed were based on the Talmud and not on the Torah. Rabbi Morris, this is all from the source. Rabbi Morris in Kurtzer wrote a most revealing and comprehensive article with the title, What is a Jew?, which was published as a feature article in Look magazine in June 17, 1952 issue. In that article, Rabbi Morris Kurtzer evaluated the significance of the Talmud to Judaism today. In that illuminating treatise and that important subject, by the most qualified authority at the time, Rabbi Morris N. Kurtzer stated, the Talmud consists of 63 books of legal, ethical, and historical writings of the ancient rabbis. It was edited 5 centuries after the birth of Jesus. It is a compendium of law and lore. It is the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law, and it is, note, the textbook used in the training of rabbis. So rabbis are trained according to the Talmud. And the Talmud has very little in common with the Bible. Then he states, from the birth of Jesus until this day, there have never been recorded more vicious and vile, libelous blasphemies of Jesus or Christians and the Christian faith by anyone, anywhere, or any time than you will find between the covers of the infamous 63 books, which are the legal code which forms the basis of the Jewish religious law as well as the textbook used in the training of rabbis. I don't want to go into it. If I were to put the quotes on the screen, which the Talmud contains about Jesus, you would be horrified. It is some of the vilest statements that I have ever had the dishonor of reading. And this is what their training consists of. He then proceeds to quote some of the most horrendous statements from the Talmud regarding ethical issues, and not only regarding ethical issues, which deal with many, many issues from economics to relations with women, etc., and, of course, the view on Christ. As to the origin of the present Jews in Palestine, he states that those Jews derived from Eastern Europe, and many, many of the Jews that today live in the reconstituted state of Israel come from Eastern Europe, are not descendants of the Judeans or the lost tribes of Israel, but rather descendants of the Khazars. Who were they? They were a nation most people do not even know of. He writes, the so-called self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe in modern history cannot legitimately point to a single ancient ancestor who ever set even a foot on the soil of Palestine in the era of Bible history. Research also revealed that the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe were never Semites, are not Semites now, nor can they ever be regarded as Semites at any future time by any stretch of the imagination. What secret, mysterious power has been able for countless generations to keep the origin and the history of the Khazars and the Khazar kingdom out of the history textbooks? Did you ever learn about it at school? I never learned about it. And out of classroom courses in history throughout the world, the origin and the history of Khazars and the Khazar kingdom are certainly incontestable historical facts. You have to do some cross-checking. Even the Jewish Encyclopedia is quite explicit about it. This was the Khazar kingdom. Here is the Black Sea, the Byzantine Empire. Here was Persia. And here was the kingdom of the Khazars. It was a massive kingdom. Now let's look at some of this interesting history. The Khazars were an Asiatic nation. And the Jewish Encyclopedia states Persian origin that converted to Talmudic Judaism. Now, obviously, some of the rabbis involved there could have been Judeans and probably were Judean descendants, but their converts are not Judeans. And that had conquered a vast area of Eastern Europe, which was in turn later conquered by the Russians in the 10th and 13th century. So that is why there are so many Russian Jews. Have you ever thought where they came from? Did they escape from Palestine? Were they the lost 10 tribes? Did they emigrate to Russia? No. This is a totally different nation that accepted Talmudic Judaism. He writes, after a historic session with representatives of the three monotheistic religions, King Bulan, 7th century, decided against Christian and Islam, because Islam had just arisen, and selected as the future state religion the religious worship then known as Talmudism, and not known and practiced as Judaism, which was totally different, which was based on the Bible. They adopted the Hebrew alphabet, and the Khazars adapted words to their requirements from the German, the Slavonic, and the Baltic languages. This language was known as Yiddish. And Yiddish used the Hebrew alphabetic characters, but not Hebrew. It's not Hebrew. It's Yiddish. I've always wondered, when I hear them speaking Yiddish, I understand quite a few words. Why? Because I'm German. They had many exchanges with universities and their students were trained. So here is another nation which had occupied this area And they had adopted this religion and brought rabbis in and trained the people, but they were not Judean. Now let's jump to today. In accordance to this history, the religion of the modern state of Israel is based on Kabbalistic and Talmudic traditions and is far removed from the biblical worship of Yahweh. And if it is based on the Talmud, it is so anti-Jesus Christ that it belies understanding. And here we have, in March 2006, while visiting Yeshiva University at Brooklyn, New York, a Jewish institute dedicated to the study of the what? Talmud. We have Cardinal Kasper. Who's Cardinal Kasper? Cardinal Kasper is the cardinal associated with ecumenism. They are honoring the Talmud together. You see, behind the scenes, there is a pact. Because I, as a Christian, can sympathize with every other religion, but I cannot embrace a religion that speaks evil of Jesus Christ. Nor can I have a union with such a religion. Because can two walk together lest they be agreed?
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that episode. Stay tuned for the next part. Much love. Peace.
Well, in his last dying breath before leaving office, President Biden has given Ukraine authorization to start using long-range weapons to attack Russia. The timing of all of this is very interesting, according to the New York Times, and then confirmed by the Wall Street Journal that, yes, this is in fact the case. And just a short time ago, the son of George Soros posted on X, "This is great news," that President Biden has for the first time authorized Ukrainian forces to use Western-made long-range weapons to strike inside Russia. Well, Putin has responded.
Thank you very much, Madam President. What you are trying to do here, guys, preparing some false flag attack in Europe? This today's debate, this jumping on Iran, attacking, this is a clear, ready propaganda line narration preparing some terrorist attack. The next step will obviously be some journalists, functionaries of the propaganda front, presenting the public with evidence that it was from Persia that the rocket came, or that here there is that half-burned Iranian passport that this terrorist had on himself before, committing his deadly attack here. This is crazy. Iran is not an enemy for Polish people, who I represent. And I don't want to go to the war that you are trying to drag Europe in as American proxy.
Sorry,
Thank you very much.
It's just for 1 minute.
Evening News, Bob Schieffer reporting Israel unleashed another massive air attack on Palestinian guerrilla targets in Lebanon today.
From the sky, the howl of Israeli jets, bombing and bombing.
Tonight, Israel has never been closer to nor more in control of an Arab capital.
In the summer of 1982, Israel invaded neighboring Lebanon in an attempt to drive the Palestinian Liberation Organization out of its encampments on the southern border with Israel. Israeli officials justified the attack as a defensive action required to take out terrorists. But as the story played out on American television, a different narrative began to emerge, one that presented Israel as the aggressor.
What in the world is going on? Israel's security problem on its border is 50 miles to the south. What's an Israeli army doing here in Beirut? The answer is that we are now dealing with an imperial Israel, which is solving its problems in someone else's country. World opinion be damned.
The Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982 was a watershed. It was Israel breaking out beyond its immediate region to aggressively attack another country, and it was a bit of a shock to many people.
Israel was always that gallant little underdog democracy fighting for survival against all the odds. Now the Israelis have annexed East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, settled down more or less permanently on the West Bank, and occupied close to half of Lebanon. In the interests of self-defense, that gallant little underdog Israel has suddenly started behaving like the neighborhood bully.
By the time the war was over, the Israeli military would kill 17,000 Lebanese and Palestinians and wound another 30,000.
The world's terrorists are the United States. Look what we did to Iraq. Look what we did to Libya. Libya, the most successful country in all of Africa. The guy created the eighth wonder of the world with the way how he delivered water and turned deserts into farmland. And everybody had a house and everybody had education and healthcare. And we turned it into a failed state run by terrorists with open slave markets. Who did that? Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton did that. And they'll never have to pay a price for that. Barack Obama, the most they'll do is go, "Yep, that was a mistake."
Now, why did they get rid of Gaddafi?
Because he was going to start a currency of Africa just for that was going to compete with the U.S. dollar and the euro, and they can't have that because the way the United States controls the world is because the United States dollar is the reserve currency of the world. So that's why they can put sanctions on all these countries. And so what they're doing, which they shouldn't do, they're weaponizing the U.S. dollar. And so like when countries want to trade with each other, they have to go take their currency, change it into U.S. dollars so they can trade. And a lot of it was based on the petrodollar, which, by the way, Saudi Arabia just quit. They didn't renew it. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, I did hear about that.
So, and all of a sudden, CBS News is starting to do news stories about how Saudi Arabia was involved in 9/11. All of a sudden, 24 years later, all of a sudden, oh, you know what? Turns out there was something happened. And they're like, you mean 2 weeks after they decided to not renew the fucking petrodollar? Now CBS News is allowed to talk about that and investigate it, which when I talked about it, it got demonetized. But anyway, so that's why, because Gaddafi was doing that. Mm-hmm. He was going to set up a currency for all of Africa, and it was going to be based on have a gold standard. And so they're like, no, you're not. You're not fucking doing that. And they made up a bullshit thing like, we got to save the people.
Pleased to announce that the United States will provide more than $1.5 billion to address Ukraine's humanitarian and energy needs.
And the federal relief and assistance that we have been providing has included FEMA providing $750.
They got veterans and everybody else living under every goddamn bridge in this country. You think if they gave a shit about those people, don't you think they'd start helping the people right outside the front door?
Right.
Instead of, no, we got to go help people in Libya, and we got to help people. It's about helping people in Ukraine, and it's about helping people in Taiwan, and it's about no. This is all about an upward transfer of money. This is about balkanizing countries and turning it over to BlackRock and Vanguard. That's what this is about.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back.
The whole system is based on a financial fraud, which effectively takes the power that we have and it gives it to a tiny group of individuals who are running the world through the control of finance. With the infinite supply of money that we have allowed them to take, they have literally an infinite supply of money, and with that money, and from their psychopathic point of view, they have bought everything and everyone who can be bought. So those of us who cannot be bought because we operate on a level that goes way beyond the material, we are not rewarded for such behavior. We are punished for such behavior. And the most slovenly, disgustingly criminal, pedophilia, corrupt moral individuals, those are the ones that are rewarded in this system, which is upside down. We reward the pedophiles, we reward the corrupt, we reward the liars, we reward the people with no morals at all, and usually we compromise them under this system in terms of maybe a videotape.
Aside from 1963, President John F. Kennedy, up here, oh wait, it doesn't say Federal Reserve note, it says United States note. That means the U.S. government, which every government has the ability to do. Canada used to do it, Germany did it, a whole bunch of other places did it, and guess what? They got really good results. You know what they did? They managed to go ahead and keep any debt at a very reasonable and payable level. Now, this United States note, that's not at interest. It's not a private bank. And JFK was dead within 6 months of issuing this $5 note. We could solve the problems that we face right now. I have said over and over, like a broken record, the head of the snake is the financial system. The reason why they hate people like Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, John F. Kennedy, and the last one, a man named Adolf Hitler. He outlawed usury. Jesus didn't like usury either. Now, the history tells us that we shouldn't entertain anything possibly good about this man. But I'll tell you what I know I like and I respect. He ended the usury that now translates to, I don't know what it is here in the Netherlands. In the UK, I think it's like 6-7 trillion pounds. In America, we've just hit 34 trillion. First off, even if we ventured to pay back the debt, there isn't enough money in circulation to even pay it back. So who are we in debt to? They want to say it's China. They want to say it's this. They want to say everyone but the Federal Reserve Bank. And who owns that? It's a private bank. Am I anti-Semitic for pointing out that the Rothschilds-controlled Federal Reserve Bank has indebted not only America, the Bank of England? Who owns that? The Rothschilds have owned that since the 70s.
We are looking at the West being dismantled from within by those politicians that are put there by the global cult. I mean, you can see aspects of it with the World Economic Forum and its young leaders that turn up later to be the leaders of Western countries and non-Western countries too. But that's what's going on. You know, these people like Starmer, Prime Minister of Britain, the people around Biden, not Biden, I don't know what he's doing, but the people around Biden, they're representing the cult. The people around Trump, despite what is his natural constituency, which is not wanting this stuff, the people immediately around him will be those that are representing the cult. So it's not about national governments. It's about that which is controlling national governments. And as you rightly say, Saudi Arabia has had its orders. They're going to drop the dollar, and they drop the dollar. And the implications are going to be enormous. Well, the banks, as I said earlier, are holding on for dear life. You've got an economy. Again, I'll use the same analogy I've used many, many times. The global economy, not least the American economy, is like those cartoon characters who are chasing each other. And they're chasing each other across the land. And they're so concentrating on chasing each other, they don't realize when they run off the edge of a cliff. But they keep going forward, even though there's fresh air underneath them. And then eventually one of them looks down, sees what the situation is, and they all fall into the ravine. And that's the global economy. It's all based on confidence. I mean, what is a dollar worth? right? It's a piece of paper with some printing on it. So it's worth nothing. What its value comes from is what people perceive its value to be. It's all a mind game. It's all a confidence trick. And if you believe that it's worth a lot of money, you will then invest in it and you'll buy dollars. If you think it's on its arse, then that's the last thing you're going to do is buy dollars. So the whole thing comes down. And so given that the banking system is already in a perilous state, not least in America, not only in America either, then what is this going to do? It's going to exacerbate that situation. I think you're going to see, as the weeks and months unfold, you're going to see a lot more banks go bust. Smaller banks to start with, maybe, but then the bigger ones start. The situation with inflation, the situation with price increases from a falling dollar. I mean, the more the dollar loses value, the less it can buy, and the more dollars you're going to need to buy what you bought before. It's called inflation. So the implications and the potential consequences, Jay, of this decision are, it's not possible to overstate them. And this is the start, you see. It's a big step because it's Saudi Arabia and the oil and all the rest of it. But you're going to see more and more people doing this, more and more countries doing this. And it's just going to go on worsening because as they build up the power of the East, they are dismantling the power of the West, financially in this case, but in all other areas as well. And when I spoke earlier about politicians who represent the cult, not the people of the country they're supposed to represent, well, the sanctions against Russia is a wonderful example because they weren't sanctions on Russia at all. They were sanctions on the West. It was the sanctions that pushed up energy prices and helped to fuel inflation. And all it did from a Russian point of view is move them closer to China. People like China and India started filling the gap that the West was filling before in terms of buying Russian energy and other goods. And it's basically fused that BRICS alliance even more. And I remember in that interview you mentioned with Putin and Tucker Carlson, that Putin said at one point, "I don't understand. They put sanctions on Russia, but it's hurting the West. I don't understand." Well, you bloody do understand, Mr. Putin, because you know exactly why that was done, because you're in on it as well. Let's not kid ourselves. This is a global situation. I mean, okay, the cult is going to control all these different countries, but it's not going to control a country as pivotal as Russia. Are you having a laugh? It's a game. It's a perceptual game. And so he well knew that the sanctions against Russia were actually sanctions on the West. And it's all brought this about. And, you know, more sanctions that have now been announced has led to this situation where the Russian stock market has stopped the trading with euros and dollars. I mean, it's all a game. And it's to kid ourselves that there are two sides fighting each other when actually there's one side fighting you. It's like I've said so many times, know the outcome and you'll see the journey. The outcome is a AI perceptually controlled population that is further controlled by a digital currency, which allows them to take fines and anything they want from your bank account at will. And an AI destroyed job market which leaves people at the mercy of a guaranteed income, a universal guaranteed income, which would be a pittance. And if you don't accept it, then there will be consequences. And in terms of, well, how are you going to put food on the table then? And if you want to speak out when the universal basic income comes in, we allow it, then you'll lose your universal basic income because you can't challenge the government and get it at the same time. This is where it's going. Now, the bulwark to that is personal savings and access to an independent income outside of the system's control.
David Icke and other speakers like him have been warning about this global cult and its grand plans to continue to dominate and subjugate the rest of us. At the moment, Icke believes the plan is to strengthen the East and weaken the West to ensure the populace is more welcoming of its radical ideas. This could very well be the end of the free world and the end of everyone brave enough to challenge the grand plans of dominance and control. With the West captured, completely dominated, and silenced, there will be no challenge whatsoever to the cult's rule. It will finally be able to achieve its endgame. If all of these scenarios come to pass, the world could turn into a dystopian nightmare, especially for those who challenge the prevailing narrative. This is why we must resist now, before it's too late, by educating others about what's coming and uniting our communities against these harmful plans. Only with a united voice can we start to reject this dystopian New World Order.
The police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. And it's unimpeachable. The cars have cameras on them. I think we have a squad car here someplace. But those kind of applications using AI, if we can use AI, and we're using AI to monitor the video. So if that altercation that occurred in Memphis, the chief of police would be immediately notified. It's not people that are looking at those cameras, it's AI that's looking at the camera. No, you can't do this. It would be like that's going to be an event that's immediately, an alarm is going to go off, it's going to be, and we're going to have supervision. In other words, every police officer is going to be supervised at all times. And the supervision will, and if there's a problem, AI will report the problem and report it to the appropriate person, whether it's the sheriff or the chief or whomever we need to take control of the situation. We have, same thing. We have drones. If there's something going on in a shopping center, and I'll stop. A drone goes out there, get there way faster than a police car.